Mr. Fadabine, Mrs. Maxon-Kennelly, Mr. Llewellyn, Mr. Patton. If we could stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, please. Pledge allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, the first item we have is election of officers. So I will take nominations for Board of Education Chairman.
Yeah.
Yeah, Mr. Patton.
I'd like to nominate Mr. Phil Dwyer for chairman.
I accept the nomination.
Okay, any other nominations? Yes, Ms. Cornell.
I nominate Mr. Fadabine.
Mr. Fadabine, do you accept?
Yes.
Okay. All right, so we will now have a vote, unless, I guess, no other nominations, I'm assuming. Okay. All right, so we'll have a vote. All in favor of Mr. Dwyer, please raise your hand. Mr. Convertito, Mr. Dwyer, Mrs. Gerber, Mrs. Maxon-Kennelly, and Mr. Patton. All those for Mr. Fadabine, Mrs. Lou McCormick, Ms. Cornell, Mr. Fadabine, Mr. Llewellyn. Mr. Dwyer is chair, 5-4. Okay, move on to Board of Education Vice Chairman. Are there any nominations? Mrs. Maxon-Kennelly.
I'd like to nominate John Convertito.
Do you accept? Okay, any other nominations? Yes, Ms. Cornell.
I nominate Mr. Fadabine.
Okay, Mr. Fadabine, do you accept?
Okay.
Okay, so we will have a vote for Vice Chair. All for Mr. Convertito, please raise your hand. Mr. Convertito, Mr. Dwyer, Mrs. Gerber, Mrs. Maxon-Kennelly, Mr. Patton. All for Mr. Fadabine, Mrs. Lou McCormick, Ms. Cornell, Mr. Fadabine, Mr. Llewellyn. Mr. Convertito is Vice Chair. Congratulations, and I am done.
So we almost should have a standing ovation, but we will take a moment to move some chairs around. If Mr. Convertito would grab his sign, and we can switch seats.
Here's the sign.
Yeah. Okay. I would hope so. Yes.
How many different chairs have you actually sat in your 6 years?
Oh, I can't remember. There you go. Hi. Now you gotta listen to me close up. Uh-oh. He's in a bad spot. You gotta listen to me.
Okay, I guess we're ready. Thank you. We'll start with student reports, but I would ask the board for unanimous consent that since we have another student in the audience, Ms. Sarah Reynolds, who's here for some acknowledgement, if we could move item 6A right after the student reports. Seeing no objection, that's what we will do. So, Mr. Hatzis, you will be ready. So, student reports. We have 3 students here, Tyler Schuster, Suzanne Finity, and Max Bush. Who wishes to go first?
All right, so we have a lot of cool in-class activities and field trips going on right now, or coming up very soon in Fairfield Ward. Our fashion merchandising class is setting up their Trends boutique, in which they sell all handmade jewelry, clothes to students and parents of the school. And that money gets donated to a local charity. Our food service students are preparing and serving a luncheon for Fairfield senior citizens at the Senior Citizen Center. And our annual Carillon Concert is taking place on December 18th. We'll be holding 2 shows, and both are already sold out. As well as they'll be performing for all of the students the day before break. Our mock trial team will be competing in the state competition held at Waterbury Superior Court this Thursday, and the team hopes to be successful and make it to the next round. Our sports season is starting up actually tomorrow, and as we're here right now, all of the parents of athletes are meeting with the athletic directors and coaches to get the season started. Our school counselors and counseling center are working together to collaborate on a new program that's called More Than Sad. This is a program that is for suicide awareness and prevention, developed by the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, in which students will attend and learn more in detail, the causes, how to prevent it, and more about like what it actually is, rather than just going by the stereotypes that they hear. And then it's a very busy time for our school counselors and our senior class, who are working very hard to get their final applications in before January 1st deadline as well.
Thank you. Any questions for our representative from Ward? Fairfield Ward? Seeing none, let's hear from Fairfield Ludlow.
Okay, well, our winter, thank you. Our winter play, Holiday Memories, just happened last week, December 5th and 6th. It's a 2-part play, with the first being Truman Capote's Thanksgiving Visitor, and the second being O. Henry's The Gift of the Magi. While some students were confused by the titles, play they hadn't heard of before, some class did have an opportunity to preview the play during the week before, which I think helped increase turnout, which was strong, especially on the first day. We had a lot of club activity happen recently. Our mock trial team actually did have their first event, and they will be moving on to the second round. Red Cross's annual blood drive happened last Friday, and that was a huge success. They reached their goal of 34 pints of blood donated. That was really well publicized. Students were excited about that. The AFS is going to be distributing their box of citrus this weekend. The citrus sale is a huge event that we hold every year, and it's a big deal for those guys. And then Key Club's drive for Operation Hope is just concluded, and the French Honor Society will be collecting donations of gifts for Haitian families in Connecticut this week. In other activities, we had an international relations class. They got to take a trip to the UN last week. They had an interesting tour, and they got to have a close-up look at an actual human rights briefing, which was very interesting for the class. That was not expected. Our AP Gov class just finished their annual federalism debate, in which students debated whether a stronger central or stronger state government, would be better. Suzanne and I actually both in that, although we did not directly face each other, which was fortunate. We also have the upcoming Candlelight Concert next week, Thursday, December 18th, which is at 6:30 and 8:30, which is always really well attended, and I believe this year it is sold out.
It is.
After the successful fall season at Fairfield Ludlow, all of our student athletes are looking forward to the winter season. Teams had tryouts starting right after Thanksgiving break, and by now, teams are selective, set, and looking forward to their first games. For basketball, their seasons begin over holiday break. Also, competition for dance team and cheerleading are coming up. For the past couple of years, both teams have been very successful and hope for another positive outcome this year. And again, the last on the list, but the first on all students' minds, college. Early decision applications should hear back in the next couple of days, and students are anxious and excited. Early action applications should hear back soon if they have not already. A handful of colleges have already accepted their early action applicants. These students now have the difficult job of deciding where they want to attend in the fall. Lastly, regular decision application deadlines are rapidly approaching, like Tyler mentioned. Most schools have a January 1st, 15th, or February 15th deadlines. Students now, who have procrastinated a little too much, are finishing their applications. All students, regardless of when or where they applied to college, are excited for the upcoming holiday break and the ability to relax for a little bit before midterms.
Thank you very much. Any questions for our representatives from Fairfield Ludlow? Thank you. So I invite you to stay for the next student presentation. And if you're really interested, you can stay for the health insurance projections. Or you can go on to your regular activities and studies. So, thank you. I would ask Mr. Hatzit, and is Mr. Schultz in the audience as well?
Sarah.
To please come forward.
If you have never been to a swim meet, it is a sensory experience. Between the smell of the chlorine, the humidity of the atmosphere, and the loud cheers of teammates, it is really quite an amazing thing to behold. We have a lot of dedicated students who have put in hours and hours and hours of training. From the perspective of having to get up at all kinds of hours because of the difficulty in getting time in pools in this area. And we are very proud of all of our swimmers, but we had one in particular who was extremely successful this year. I'd like to introduce to you Miss Sarah Reynolds, who is a freshman, and despite all of the challenges and all the time commitment and everything else, managed to, at the Class LL state tournament, finish second in the 100-meter freestyle, but also took home first place champion as the 50-meter. And those of you that know swimming know that it is an event that there is no room for error in the tight times between the finishers. So I'd like to once again introduce Sarah Reynolds from Fairfield Ludlow High School. Sarah.
Everyone's standing up. Yes, it's a very difficult sport, to say the least. I do have to wake up at 4:45 in the mornings, but it's definitely worth it when you see those times. I couldn't have done it without my coaches and my great teammates always cheering me on. It's a great atmosphere to really grow up in. So thank you so much.
So here's a question. You're a freshman, but you started swimming a lot sooner than just this year. So
Yes.
how long have you been swimming in a pool competitively?
I think as long as I actually can remember. I grew up with this sport. I mean, my brother did the sport, so did my sisters, so it's always been a part of my background. I've always loved it. So I think before I could run, I could swim.
Do you have any family here with you?
Oh, my father's right there.
Stand up and be recognized. If I need help with snow decisions at 4:45, I can call you.
Oh, yes, of course.
Every student's dream, right?
Yes.
Thank you and congratulations.
Thank you.
Board members wish to make any comment before Sarah sits down?
I just have one quick question. As a former collegiate swimmer, I have to ask, what was your time in the 50?
23:75.
Okay.
And what was yours?
That was my event, but it was not 23:70.
Well, thank you again, everyone.
Well, I will attest to that. She did start swimming just about when she was walking, because you would be at my house after those swim meets. So
I
I
would.
remember those started at a very young age,
Yes,
and really,
yes.
congratulations.
Really.
Well deserved.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I want to thank everyone here for the opportunity to swim. It means so much to me that we have a high school team, and I've met so many great people through the high school program, so thank you again.
Carlton, we have another item before you.
Carlton,
I know you're excited.
this is the time where we take public comment on non-voting items. There are two voting items tonight. One relates to the approval of policy 5516, and the other is the approval of the calendar. Any comments on those two items, please make at the time that the items come up for the agenda. But other than that, please come forward, state your name and address, and share with us. Again, with a 2-minute limit for each speaker.
My name is Kelly Crisp. I live in Fairfield. My 3 children have either graduated or attend Fairfield Ludlow High School. I know that you guys have received my letters. I know that they've been edgy. It brings me no pleasure to continue to have these very difficult conversations or advocacy efforts to keep our kids safe. I believe that it's a right of every child in this district, every staff member, every teacher to attend a school that is safe. We've had 5 arrests of teacher coaches, a 6th lawsuit still pending. 2 of those teachers have been sentenced. And for those who don't know, my background is a felony prosecutor specializing in sex crimes. I've written legislation to keep kids safe with my last bit of legislation in New York State on behalf of child performers. I've spoken to 4 national experts on the events that have taken place in our town year after year that go unaddressed by the board and by central office. And the national experts say that this is shocking. This is not normal. There's no framework in place that I know of that can reliably get the information that students and staff have about potential concerns to the people that can address the concerns. I had a conversation last week with a member of this district, a staff member. There's no reliable system, and the system that I've been advocating for over a year has that system in place. And again, I will personally guarantee, I have my checkbook tonight, $4,250 of my own money.
Thank you for your comment. Do we have other speakers on that or other topics that wish to come forward?
Hello, Board. My name's Loretta J. I'm a Fairfield resident, and I just wanted to touch base about the food allergy policy and say...
Ms. J., we take comments on the policy when it comes up for a vote.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought it was for everything.
That's
I apologize.
Okay. That's okay.
Should I say it now anyway? I can be quick. No?
No, please,
Okay.
so that we can stay with our protocols. Thank you. Any comments on non-voting items only? I promise you'll be first when we get to that item. No other comments. Thank you very much. Now we're on to health insurance. Every December is when we officially, actually November, when we talk about program issues, December when we talk about health insurance and whatnot. And so this is that process, if you will. And we invite the health insurance consultants for the town who also serve in that role for the Board of Ed to come and give us an update. Dr. Title, do you wish to make any comments before we hear from them?
Let's say that this is sort of the annual December event, and the difference you'll notice, if you recall from last year, is that we had in the past prepared an estimated profit and loss projection for the fund for next year, which gave you some idea of where we might fall budget-wise. We're not able to do that at this time. One is we have another month to go before we finalize that. And secondly, we agreed with the town last year, with the first selectman in particular, that we would have a discussion with the first selectman and potentially chairman of the Board of Finance to come to a common understanding of what budget number should be, so that when the number goes in, that's a number that's been agreed to by all of the key players in the first 2 rounds. So until we have that conversation, which has not happened yet, I didn't want to put a number out there of what impact this might have on the budget when we haven't had those conversations with the town. They had made some moves last year to shore up our health insurance fund, had to figure out the status of that, and so what you have then is a little briefer presentation, because really this is Carlton and Eric's turn to explain to you what the projection looks like between now and the end of 2015, and then what it looks like for 15 and 16. So I'll let them walk you through the document. So we have 2 pages for them, right?
Great.
Okay.
Okay, you should have 2 documents in front of you. One labeled at the top in the black bar, updated current year 14-15, and then the next page would be renewal year 15-16. So we'll look at the updated current year first. Basically what this document does is it looks at the 14-15 year with information that we did not have when we set the budget number initially. So I think we have another 8 or 9 months. So this is just an update of the 14-15 year. Okay, so and I'm not sure, Dr. Title, do you want me to go through the actual calculations?
I would walk through one set of columns.
Okay, so we'll look at the, under the Cigna Medical, we'll look at the active column, and I'll go down, numbers 1 through 18 and explain how we get each of those numbers. So on line 1, the experience period paid claims, that's the latest 12 months of paid claims. That's the basis for our projections going forward. So that number on the active medical side is $18,159,000. Claims in excess of the individual stop-loss limit. The stop-loss is protection that's purchased by the Board of Education in the event of catastrophic claims. So any individual claimant who has claim dollars in excess of $300,000 are paid by the stop-loss vendor. The board's responsible for the first $300,000. Now, when we get, well, we didn't show the large claims here, but the top number, the $18,159,722, is actually net of any large claims, because that's the way Cigna reports it to us. Some vendors show us the gross number, and then we have to net out the claims in excess of the individual stop-loss limit. But in this instance, Cigna provides us with a net number. So the net paid claims are $18,159,722. You'll skip down to line 5. The annual trend factor last year was 8.6%. Now, trend in layman's terms is inflation. There are a number of components that make up trend, but for your purposes here today, it's basically inflation. So 8.6% annually, and we're trending that over a period of, let's see.
8 months.
Yeah, 8 months in this case, yes, sorry. So the 8.6 number, if you look up at line 4, would be 5.7 over that 8-month period. So we have to increase that $18,159,000 in claims by 5.7%. That gets you to the $19,186,000 on line 6. Okay? We divide that by the head counts that were in place during that experience period, that 12-month experience period, which is 1,253, gives you a per capita number of 15,313 on an annual basis. Multiply that by the head counts as of the last month, which I believe in this case was October, of 1,239. We're projecting claims forward of $18,696,558. To that number, we have to add administrative charges. That's basically what Cigna charges the board to adjudicate claims, maintain records, and so forth, just basic overhead. The next 2 items, the ACA Pcori fee and the transitional reinsurance fee, are both mandated by the federal government. That's part of the Affordable Care Act, or Obamacare, if you will. The Pcori fee is $2 per member per year, and the transitional reinsurance fee is $63 until January of 15, and then it goes down to $44 per member per year. So we calculate those charges out. The stop-loss charge, that's the charge that I spoke about before for covering those claimants in excess of $300,000. So that's $434,000. You add lines 10, 11, 12, 13, and 14 to get line 15, $20,227,230. And then line 16 is the number that we projected initially for the 14-15 year. Okay? So if you go all the way to the right-hand column, the furthest column on the right, under total for all coverages, the projection for the 14-15 year is 28,626,713. We initially projected 28,353,731. So if what we expect to happen happens, it would cost $272,000 more than we had initially anticipated, or 1%. Questions on the
Yeah, let's stop there and see.
current year?
Questions from the board on the first page, the update to this year's health projection. Mr. Llewellyn.
Sure. When you were explaining lines 2 and 3, you had said that 3 is net of the second line, which is the stop loss, and it's reported differently by different vendors, brokers.
Right.
In this case, we've had none, is that correct? We had
No,
0, that's
you-
why it's the same here?
No, you had some.
We did have some.
But the 18 million includes net of those large claimants. I have the number in here somewhere. Hold on. You had $1,397,000 in excess.
And that is how many instances? Do you know?
4. So the gross number would be that 18 million plus the 1,397,000.
Got it. Okay, thank you. The 8.6 is our annual trend,
Annual trend.
and
correct.
that's something that this board chooses, or how do we get to that number?
That comes off of the Aon Trend Survey, which is, we do a national survey of 55 healthcare companies, in addition to a staff of somewhere around 200 actuaries within our own company, and we come up with what we think annual trend is.
Okay. And is that number, do you have that annual trend number for what you're recommending this budget season?
I do, it's on the next
That's
page.
on the other
Got
side
it,
of the page.
okay. Nope, we're still on space. Perfect. And then the Cigna rate of the 652. Line 11, sorry, the admin.
Yeah.
Is that a good fee, an average fee? How does that compare to other districts that you have experience with?
And in my mind, it's a spectacular fee. I negotiated it.
Oh, of course, then,
It's
okay.
it's a-
So you're unbiased?
Of course, I'm unbiased. Well, it's a 5-year guarantee, so when we moved to Cigna, we negotiated a 5-year fee guarantee.
Okay.
And even at the time, I thought it was a good fee.
Okay. And then, I guess as we come down to the lower right, so what we're saying is we anticipate being 1% over kind of where we budgeted.
Correct.
Which, okay, I guess we'll get there in the forecast. And then, so wait, the forecast is this next year for the remainder of this year, the next page?
The next
This
page
is for next year.
15,
So this
16.
year's here. So the town had something presented where it shows that the Board of Ed has a fund balance as of June 30th of 14 of 796, but has a projected fund balance at the end of this fiscal year of June 30, 2015 of negative 745,000. So that would imply just north of $1.5 million deficit in expense versus cash cost? How do we
Well, I don't
bridge
know.
those numbers?
I've not seen that document. and-
No, that's the, if you wanted to be at 1 times the IBNR, right,
Right.
then you'd have to be at about $1.5 million in round numbers at the end of the year. And the projections are we weren't going to be at 1 times the IBNR, we were going to be about a half of the IBNR.
Right.
That's what you're referring to. Right.
That's what I'm asking. And then,
Right.
what is our IBNR projected to be then?
So it's about $1.5 million, June 30th of 14.
So we're saying at, Dr. Title, at the end of this fiscal year, our IBNR is expected to be?
We have to go calculate that. We got the 14 number from them, so we have to go, just probably trend it up.
But it would be about 750, correct? If this is at a negative 750 as opposed to 1?
Well, the IBNR is calculated by Aon as approximately a month's worth of runouts, which, Doreen, was it like $1,440,000 at the end of June of 14, right? Say that? $1.6 million.
Yeah, 1,000,005 something. If you were going to try to get the number on June 30th of 15.
Correct.
You'd just trend that up.
Right.
8.5% or so.
Right. So that's what we have to address. Yeah, it's really not an Aon issue, it's really our budgeting issue.
So if it's 1,000,006, we've got 800 fund balance
Right.
beginning, we're going to be at about 800 negative ending.
Will be negative compared to 1 times the IBNR, which is the target. But the fund will still have a balance.
But the IBNR represents those expenses incurred but not yet billed, is that correct?
No. The
No.
IBNR is technically money that should be set aside in the event of termination. So if the town of Fairfield went, I guess, completely bankrupt and had no money, they have a liability for claims that were incurred prior to the termination or bankruptcy date.
Correct.
And would be paid after that date.
So they're incurred, just not recorded?
Correct.
Okay. Effective, okay. And then in the second column here, we have active, we have retirees, and we have total. So how does the retirees column work?
The math is the exact same.
Okay. And then who's covered under retirees?
Underage, anybody who's retired.
Anybody who's retired?
Yeah.
If they're under age 65 and they stay on our health plan,
Right.
they're covered, but they pay 100% of the cost minus the state's small subsidy. At age 65, if they're Medicare eligible, they go to Medicare, and they're off our plan. If they're not Medicare eligible because they started working here before 1986, and they aren't otherwise covered by Medicare, then they can stay on our plan indefinitely. That's becoming a smaller and smaller number of
Okay.
people.
Right.
That's
these
how
are-
it works.
These are gross numbers, so it doesn't take into consideration any employee contributions at all.
So the retirees are paying in basically 100%.
Correct.
Of the rate that the actives are paying, and we show that in our budget, in our profit and loss statement as income. So this is purely expenses.
Correct.
The income side of it comes when we do the budgeting.
But what you're saying is it's net zero to the district?
It's net zero to the district because they pay 100% of the cost, and the only subsidy they get doesn't come from us, it comes from the state. The Board of Ed does not subsidize any retiree health insurance whatsoever.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Anything else, Mr. Llewellyn?
I'm sure I'll have more on the next page.
Any questions on this page? If not, Mr. Fattabine.
I'll go real quick. On line 18 of this page, you have different columns as well. Active retirees total across from Cigna Medical, prescription, dental, and total. I just want to know if you can comment. In looking at those numbers, it looks like retirees have more consistently been under-projected because it's a higher percentage in each of the retiree portions. And if you can comment why you believe that is and why.
Yeah, I understand your question. The population is so small in the retiree piece of this that if one of those large claimants happened to be an under age 65 retiree, we're going to miss the projection.
All right, so it's based on the population group.
Yeah.
All right, I can understand that.
Law
Statistically, it's
of large numbers, yeah.
Thank you.
Sure.
Mr. Pat?
Could you explain line 4 in terms of the number that's there, the 1.057, in terms of how that factors in? And then on line 5 for annual trend, I thought when you were rattling off numbers, you said, I thought I heard 5.7% instead of 8.6. And
No, 5.7 comes from line 4.
Okay, that's. Can you explain that again?
Yeah, sure. So if when we trend from an experience period to a projected period, okay, we take it from the middle of that experience period to the middle of the projection period. Now, normally that's somewhere around 18 or 19 months because we're doing it so far in advance. But because this is just a catch-up of the current year, we're projecting from this experience period to a period that's much shorter because this projection period is the one that you're currently in. It's not the next one that we're going to project to. Okay, so in other words, instead of that long period that we have to trend those claims for of 18 or 19 months, we only have to trend our experience period 8 months now, because we're only trying to project up through this current year, through the end of this current year. So if you take the 8.6%, that's an annual number. So if you chop it back for 8 months, it's 5.7, okay?
Okay, Mr. Patton? No? No other members? On to next year.
The next page is the exact same mathematics as the prior page. The only thing that changes is that trend factor on line 4. Okay, so instead of trending through the end of this current policy year, we're trying to project out for the 15-16 year. So the spread between the experience period and the renewal projection period is now 20 months. Also, line 5 changed. Since we did this last year, the annual trend has gone from 8.6% to 9%. Okay? And everything else, in terms of the math, is the exact same. Now, I will say one thing. On line number 11, you'll see a benefit adjustment there of 0.9613. That was as a result of the teacher and administrator negotiations. So the money that was saved as part of that negotiation is reflected in that 0.9613. We actually calculated out the dollar savings and backed into a fraction, or decimal.
So, if I can emphasize that point, that if there had been no change in the teacher's contract, let's leave the administrators out of it for the time being, it's much smaller, then the experience claims that you'd be projecting would be $20,681,545.
Correct.
But because of the plan design changes, this is just about plan design changes, right? This has nothing to do with premium cost share.
This has nothing to do with contribution. It's
Right.
just plan design
So-
changes. Right?
You might remember in the discussion of the teacher's contract that talked about that there would be a savings of, in the neighborhood of, say, $800,000 for the plan design changes in the teacher's contract. That was one of the points. And this is where it shows up.
Right.
So instead of having to fund the $20,681,545, the board will be funding an estimated $19,881,36 in that.
If you look all the way
Right.
to the right-hand side, under the total column, instead of 29,537, it's 28,716.
Right. And on the Caremark, there were some changes made there, but they're much smaller, so the savings is fractional.
Correct.
But there are some savings there as well, because the changes made to the drug plan.
Yeah, the number's all the way on the right-hand
Right.
side of the total of all coverages.
So it's not that our health insurance claims are going to go down as a result of changes in the contract. They're just not going to go up as much.
It's always mitigation when you make
It's a
changes.
mitigation.
It's always.
Right? So that's how it plays out in here. That's, okay, thank you.
Correct.
Anything else that you want to comment before we go to questions?
Well, if you look at the bottom right-hand corner at 6.6, we're using an annual trend number of 9%. So if that number were 9% in the bottom right-hand corner, I would say you were having an average year. 6.6 is better than trend, so we consider that to be, just slightly better than average, if you will.
That's it? Questions from the board? Mr. Llewellyn?
Sure, a couple questions. So, based on this analysis here, what are you saying our projected increase in health benefit cost will be next year versus this year?
Percentage or dollars?
Percentage, please.
6.6.
6.6. So does that take into account the 9? So it's not 9 plus 6?
No, that includes the 9.
Okay.
The 9 is the trend piece of it, and then that gets knocked back by the savings to the teachers and so forth. 6, yeah. And not everything gets bumped up by 9. The administrative charges don't go up at all in terms of on a per employee per month basis.
Oh, that's a fixed
That's
not a percentage?
Right.
Okay.
Right. So the only thing that trends forward are the claim portion of it, which is, 85 to 90% of the total. But
Okay. And back to, Mr. Fadabine's question about the percentages versus retirees, we have a smaller, variance in the current year, but going into next year, it seems to go up to 18% and 19% for health and
Yeah, the reason for that is because if you have poor experience in the current year, or the latest 12 months, is poor on the retiree side, that just gets trended forward. So it's going to be poor in the next year as well.
Okay. And then, I guess this question, I'm not sure if it's for you or if it's for Dr. Title, but you talk about plan design changes. Could you give us examples of what those plan design changes are that would result in that million?
The plan
1,000
design
change.
changes were outlined in the contract documents that we looked at a couple of meetings ago, and Carlton, you
Excuse
might
me,
want to...
Phil?
It burned into my memory if you want me to.
So you may want to outline some of them.
Yeah, I believe the copay, the physician office visit copay was $20, went to 35 and 40, depending on whether it was a PCP or a specialist. The hospital copay went from $150 to $275. The outpatient surgical copay went from 0 to 100.
Okay.
And so forth, yeah.
Okay, so it's in the payment terms, it's the copay, not in the benefits provided.
No, the benefits provided are basically never touched. It's just who's paying for the benefit. So that's just it's a cost shift, really.
And when you say the benefits themselves are never touched?
Yeah, I mean, when you say, so if you have a medical benefit with Cigna, they cover these services. And it's basically anything that's medical necessity, they cover. If you go into negotiations and you change this provision and this provision and this provision, the same services are covered. They're not covered at the same level. So instead of you paying a $15 copay for your office visit, you might have to pay $25 or $30 or so forth. But the visit itself is still covered. Those things don't change.
Right, and the types of services don't change.
No, exactly.
And how do our
The
services...
network doesn't change. Nothing changes except for who's responsible for that piece of the payment.
And based on your other clients, how do our services compare to those of other municipalities?
They're right in line with every other municipality.
They are. Okay, thank you.
And, other questions from the board members? Mr. Fadabine.
My question relates to line, let's see, 11 again, where you have active and retirees who just look at the medical.
Yep.
I understand the .96 is a reduction in cost due to the contract changes, primarily due to co-pays, as I understand it.
Right.
Now, are retirees bound by that same contract of active workers where they would have the same increase in copay and therefore presumably have the same cost savings? Well, in other words, why is it not .96 as well, and why is it 0.1?
It could be. I actually applied the entire savings to the active line, but I could have spread it across both.
Okay. Well, so in other words, the active is, I would say, artificially reduced more because the retirees are getting that benefit.
Yeah, we don't rate. We don't project our rates based on whether you're an active or a retiree.
All right.
It's all done in total. So it doesn't really matter where the savings shows up on here, as long as it shows up in total.
The other question I have is based on, I don't know, the gray area, 17 to 20 primarily, but it's the dental. The dental, something seems to be going on with the dental where you have some negative percent changes. Just what's happening with dental? Dental is becoming less expensive, or what's going on?
No, your folks aren't going to the dentist.
Well, why do you think that is?
I have no idea.
No, well, remember, we did change to a network.
Right. I mean,
right? And so that did save us money on dental.
Right, but it wouldn't show up as a negative in
Right.
this year. I mean, to Dr. Title's point, when we switched to Delta Dental, we switched to a network product where getting significant savings over the plan that was in place prior.
Right.
That would have showed up last year, and then the increase would have been a regular increase over, last year is when we would have seen the dip down, and then this year we would have seen the increase again. This is not unusual, quite frankly, for dental on a group this size. It's just utilization patterns.
Yeah, I haven't seen on my other clients either really any increases in dental over the past 3 or 4 years. It's been running very flat or negative in trend.
So you're saying it's sort of an industrial trend?
Yep.
I mean, the dental field is not increasing at the same rate as the medical field?
No, it's not. Not even, no. I mean, our annual trend rate on the dental is 4.5, and it's 9, so it's half of what the increase you would see on a medical plan, yeah.
All right, thank you.
Anything else? Mr. Fattabine, any other board members wish to ask a question? Mr. Convertito.
Excuse me, through the chair. Line 17 all the way to the right, 30 million. I guess, I don't know if this is the Dr. title. So is that the number you are recommending we use for the 15-16 budget? Is that what we're
Well,
using?
it will change because...
No, it will trend a little bit.
We have one more month.
We're going to do this at least one more time before the actual budget is set. So we'll have some more historical claim experience. So we'll recast these numbers, and whatever number shows up on the bottom right is the number that...
Yeah, we'll have to, let's suppose that this is the number that comes out at the end, doesn't change at all. And basically, what we have to do then is go back and look at what our revenue would be from all other sources, create the profit and loss statement, and then whatever's left will go in the Board of Ed budget. So this does not tell you anything about income. If the rates go up, then employee contributions go up.
Right.
So that has to be factored in as well. But this would be the, whatever number is right in that same location
Right.
will be the one that you'll see in the profit and loss statement that you'll get with the budget.
Exactly.
And to remind the board, we have to approve the budget. We're the first ones up. And so therefore, as these documents get updated at the end of January or at the end of April, at the end of March, when the different bodies, first selectman looks at it, Board of Selectmen looks at it, Board of Finance looks at it, and the RTM looks at it at different time periods. That's why you will see during the budget process, this number can go up or it can go down based on the most recent information that exists that the town is looking at it. But we need to make the decision based on where it is right now. Mr. Convertito.
I'm sorry, I had one more question. On the second page, line 16, the stop loss has gone up like $80,000. Is that just on trend, or is that, why is that?
That's, you bring up a good point. I estimated, because we don't have the renewal yet from any of these carriers, nor do we have it from the stop-loss carrier. So I have to make some estimate of what I think the increase is going to be. So I increased the stop-loss charge by 20% in these projections. Based on last year's history of, what did I say, $1.5 million?
$1.4 million.
Yeah, over the individual stop-loss limit, and a stop-loss charge of about almost $400,000 or $500,000. The stop-loss carrier has I would suggest, a bad taste in their mouth.
We made out well.
So, yeah, so...
We have a great taste in our mouth.
Yeah. So to say this year was a win is an understatement in terms of covering those large claims. But, you know, we're going to do our very best to negotiate those numbers to a reasonable increase.
Is that the same?
20 is about an average.
Do we use the same stop-loss carrier year after year, or does that go out to bid year after year? Is there contractual?
It only goes out to bid if we don't get something that we like in terms of renewal.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Any other questions? If not, thank you.
Just one question
Well,
on the forecast looking forward for the budget. So Dr. Title, in terms of the process for this year, the budget will be given to the board in January?
January 13th.
January 13th. And will we have the opportunity to have the Board of Finance and the Board of Selectmen kind of come and speak to this board to help set their expectations ahead of that budget being presented so that we can kind of have a town-wide input prior to and potentially then having a smoother process?
Are you talking about the whole budget or just this line?
I'm talking about the whole budget, but especially as it relates to this line, because I know
I
they're
don't
very
know.
concerned about this line, and they're concerned about
I could
other
ask
lines.
them that question. Generally, the Board of Selectmen says, we will take our shot at the budget during our time period. The Board of Education, you make your decisions. Same thing with the Board of Finance. They will frequently say, we'll wait until it gets through to us at a certain time, and then we will make comments. But I can inquire with the chair.
Okay, thank you.
So there are no further comments?
Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We will see you again. Sorry for boring you all to death.
They might as well just open an office down here.
Moving on to item 7A. This is the first voting item. If Ms. Jay is there, when we finish our board discussion and we move to public comment, let me put the motion in front of us so that we can get it on the table for discussion. Approval of policy 5516. Recommended motion that the Board of Education approve policy 5516, students with healthcare needs, life-threatening allergies, and glycogen storage disease management policy. Do I have a...
Quick question, if we've already made the motion, isn't that already, so we're already dealing with the language, because we already made the motion, seconded it, and then amended the language, and then postponed the vote. So does it go straight to discussion?
It comes directly back on our agenda. I'm just getting it on in a motion format so that it's clear what the motion is. Is there a motion? Somebody moving the, Mr. Patton, second?
No second, we don't do it.
Mrs. Gerber? Okay. As the chair of the committee, do you wish to introduce it, or do you wish Mr. Patton? Huh?
They're yelling to use the microphone.
I am within like an inch and a half of the microphone. You may recall at the beginning of the meeting that Mrs. Gerber had difficulty with this microphone.
Want to trade?
Since she takes notes and I speak, let's see if this helps. Does this help? Oh, much better, much better.
Josh here.
So, do you wish to make comments, or the chair, the maker of the motion, make a comment? What's your pleasure, since you're the chair?
Mr. Patton can lead off.
Mr. Patton, do you have any comments that you wish to make?
In terms of the, I guess I'll, the portion that we amended in the last time, through the chair to Dr. Title, have we gotten our legal opinions yet?
Yeah, I think what you asked us to do was to look at the substitute language that the board discussed at the last meeting, and to have our attorney look at it, because our attorney had drafted, the board's attorney had drafted some initial language, then the board wished to change it, and we said, well, the attorney should look at it again. And so it went back to the attorney, and so actually, probably, I don't know at what point, but Josh is here, and so he's looked at it, and he has some suggestions on how to change it, if the board wants to entertain those, and he could explain the rationale for it, but right now...
Mr. Patton, are you asking for the attorney to kind of walk you through the rationale for this, or what?
Sure.
Okay.
If that's, if he's here and is willing. I have it now.
Everybody has a document that looks like this that was sent out? Huh? Yesterday. Is this up at the front? Okay.
I was traveling, so I didn't see this
Point of order, through the
So-
chair. Are we going to bring our attorney to advise us in public?
We're going to bring our attorney forward to answer Mr. Patton's questions.
Just
but
to
I would-
clarify-
Mr.
To
Patton,
give his
Mr.
legal
Patton,
opinion?
Mr. Patton, can
To
I
give
finish?
his legal opinion and advise us in public?
I'm going to assume that our attorney will not be giving advice in public that he thinks
I
should be
move that we
done.
move to executive session.
Executive
to talk to
session.
to talk to our attorney. We're going to have our attorney advise us in public, we waive client privilege, and I think that's just a very poor practice.
Okay. Motion has been made. Is there a second to that motion? Ms. Maxon Kennelly. Any discussion on the motion to move into executive session? Any discussion on the motion to move into executive session? The wording for the executive session, while Mr. Fatterbean asks a question, I'll ask the attorney to state what the exact motion would be so that we get the correct motion in the minutes for moving into executive session for this particular topic.
I was going to ask a question. I was going to support the motion to move into executive session.
Okay. Thank you. Mrs. Gerber, you have a question?
I just,
Yeah.
just if, just to know what the exact motion
Yeah.
is. That's what I'm.
So, for the public's benefit, there are 5 exceptions to meeting in public, and one of them relates to getting legal advice from our attorney, and so there's a specific worded motion that allows us to do that, and I see him fashioning it now for the benefit of our secretary. While he's doing that, other comments for the motion to move into executive session? Ms. Carnell.
Thank you. I just want to clarify, is this the board's attorney, the administrator's attorney? Whose attorney is this? If we're going to executive session, I'd like to know who I'm going to be in a room with.
It's the Board of Education's attorney. It's the school district attorney who acts on behalf of the Board of Education.
Isn't that a slight conflict of interest when the Board of Ed, 3 of the members on the Board of Ed are trying to draft the policy?
I don't think so, no. The Board of Education attorney that we've hired is provides the official legal advice to the school district and to the Board of Education.
Who hired him? Was it just for this issue, or are we on retainer with the law firm?
This law firm has been hired for 7 years.
But if the Board of Ed wants a separate attorney for this issue or any other,
If a majority of the board wanted to change horses, yes, the majority
for a
of the board could
particular
act.
issue?
The Board of Education could act by majority.
There's no administrator attorney.
Yeah.
It's an attorney hired to represent the Board of Education. They work with us, but we don't have our own attorney. The attorney represents the Board of Ed, represents the school system.
But we were not.
So, can I suggest that the motion to move into executive session is not a motion to debate the attorney, it's the motion to move into executive session?
Well, then we can debate it out here about the attorney, so it's up to
Well,
you.
but that's not the motion that's in front of us, so
Well,
we can't debate a topic that is not before us at the moment.
Well, I'll make an additional motion then.
Well, first, we need to deal with this motion. Do we have an official motion that you can give to our secretary? I'm working on it, Mr. Chair. You're working on it. Other comments while he's working on it?
They know what they're voting on.
Is everybody aware of what they're voting on, and we'll trust that the attorney will get the official, you've seen these before on the agenda relative to when we're dealing with pending litigation or possible litigation and student services and whatnot. Is the board comfortable with acting on this motion pending the receipt of the exact wording? I don't see any objections, so we will move forward to the vote. If there are no further comments,
We're voting on a yet-to-be-defined motion?
that's what I was just asking, if the board is comfortable moving ahead, knowing that the motion is to move into executive session. We will get the exact wording that cites the exact Connecticut General Statute motion, but make sure that the motion is clear to you whether to move into executive session or not.
That's fine.
Is the board ready to take action on that? Sure. Okay. If there are no further questions, all in favor of moving into executive session? And for the public's point of view, we will move into another room so that you can all stay in your chairs and not have to wait in the hallway. All in favor of adjourning into executive session to discuss the legal language related to this policy, please raise your hand. It's unanimous. So we are now in executive session, and we will be back to you momentarily. So we are back in public session. The motion has been put on the table. We had the benefit of hearing from our attorney as to the various aspects of this policy. I think that everybody is on the same page. We're struggling with the language to get there. And so before we entertain a motion to perhaps remand this back for some more discussion on that, I thought I would allow some public comment. If all of you stand up and wish to make a comment, I probably will, based on the hour, question whether this was the right decision or not. But is there somebody that wishes to come forward and comment on the policy before we take any further action? Please step forward. State your name and address.
I thought he was talking to me. Hi.
Hello there. Please,
My name is
please sit
Paula
down.
Healy. I'm actually going to stand if you don't mind. I think if I sit, you won't see me. I teach kindergarten at North Stratfield School, and many of us are here because we are very concerned about some of the language that relates to reading labels. So what I did was I collected the labels from this morning's snack in my classroom. Some of the things don't have labels, but this is one snack, one day, this morning. And these are all the labels I would have to read while 22 5-year-olds wait for me to open these. So I would actually hand this to you and
hand it to our clerk.
read it, but we would all be here a really long time if you had to read every single label on every one of these snacks.
So,
And make no mistake, because you have to put forth your best efforts to read all of these every
so if
day.
you wish to leave it with our clerk of the board.
So I think
One of the things about public, go ahead, you have 2 minutes if you're finishing up.
I have just a couple things to say. I just, as far as the time goes, to wash hands before and after snack. 22 kindergartners washing hands takes 9 minutes. Doing that twice takes 18 minutes. And I don't think adults could do it any faster than 9 minutes. My kindergartners can wash hands really fast. Then the label reading, I did not do that while they waited because it would have just been too much for them. Would take me at least 17 minutes to read every single ingredient on everything there. Many of those things don't have labels, so I don't know if I would have to confiscate that from them, but that would add an extra 3 minutes in consoling the 5-year-old that I took the snack from. Then it would take me an additional
Okay, and-
3 minutes to wash down all the
But
tables.
at the moment, your
We
2
are at
minutes, excuse me,
36
your-
minutes per
but
snack.
your 2 minutes is up.
I
Thank you.
appreciate your time. Thank you.
One of the things in our public comment policy is it does allow the chair to manage public comment in a way that is helpful for the orderly processing of this meeting, so I may have to limit the number of speakers. Is there anybody that wishes to speak on a different point of view than the one that is just expressed by a teacher? Anybody from the public other than a teacher that wishes to step forward? I want to go back and forth. I want to go back and forth. Is there anybody other than a teacher? And then I'll go back to another teacher. Try and go back and forth to make sure that both the, excuse me, I'm trying to make sure that both the public and those on the teaching staff have an equal opportunity to chat. Yes, please.
Okay. I'm
State your name
speaking
and
as a
address.
parent, although as many people in this room know, I am a teacher as well. But I'm speaking as a parent of a child who has allergies, who has been taken to the emergency room for her asthma, who's been gone to the doctor for the nebulizer repeatedly for asthma. So I am aware of the concerns as a parent in that way. And as a parent, I make sure that my child is prepared. Granted, she is older. She's out of elementary school. She's actually in college. But I never expected the teacher, other than if my child was having the asthma attack, to then do the proper thing. I never expected the teacher to make sure that anyone who had something that my daughter was allergic to was nowhere near her and to separate her in any way. That was my job as a parent, to educate my child and tell my child what the things were that she needed to avoid. Obviously, since she's been on the nebulizer and gone to the hospital, at times it's happened where the asthma's gotten that bad. But I do not feel as a parent that teachers should be held responsible for something that's my responsibility as a parent. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Who wishes to come forward?
I'm Carol Carbon from 300 Home Fair Drive in Fairfield, but I also teach at Osborne Hill Elementary School. And I would like to see the board put back what was in the original language of, I guess it was the November committee meeting, John, or it was the November meeting, what the attorney for the town or the Board of Ed wanted, notwithstanding the above, it shall not be the responsibility of the faculty or staff of any elementary school to read student-provided food labels or to ascertain whether or not student-provided food items contain food, nuts, and peanuts. The reason this was put in, we were told by Karen Parks, was that it's not a policy stating that, but it's a, where they're drawing the line in the sand. The town attorney at that point did not want teachers to be held accountable. That's, write any policy around it, but stop it right there. So that was taken out at the last Board of Ed meeting. I'd like to see that language brought back in on behalf of the town and the teachers. Thank you.
Please step forward, state your name and address.
My name is Lauren Kinsley, live at 212 Buena Vista Road. I also teach at Stratfield Elementary School. I'm addressing the board tonight on a matter I've worked closely with for 9 years as a classroom teacher, allergies in the classroom. As a teacher, I've cared deeply for my students, and their safety is my #1 priority. Whether it's a lockdown, a fire drill, or a power outage due to a storm, I've always worked hard to ensure their safety. For the past 9 years I've been teaching, I have promoted education about school safety, responsibility, and citizenship. Students have learned to respect that food allergies are a part of school safety and daily life. I'm asking that you move to adopt the language recommended by our district lawyer in the allergy policy. I do not believe teachers should be taking 30 minutes out of instructional time to read the labels of 18 to 24 snack items, and then additional time out of planning instructional lessons to make phone calls home to determine the ingredients of an unlabeled snack. As the production of and processing of food becomes more complicated, it is almost impossible to guarantee classrooms will be free of nuts and tree nuts. For example, if you were to read these ingredients on a label, fenugreek, lupin, chinquapin, giandula, or filberts, would you be able to ascertain if they, in fact, contain nuts or tree nuts? Because they all do. Many teachers have approached me and asked if snack would be moved to the cafeteria for all grades. They are concerned this would take up even more instructional time. Many teachers claim they will simply eliminate a snack time due to time restrictions. I personally do not want it to come to this because my 7-year-old students will not eat from 8:15 a.m. until 1 p.m. I am not sure I feel this is an appropriate expectation, as I could not do that as an adult. Again, we have received recommendations from a legal professional, and I urge you to take that into consideration in your decisions tonight.
Thank you very much. One of the jobs of a chair is to make sure there's kind of a pro and a con, equal weight among public comments. Is there anybody that is has a different viewpoint than ones have been expressed at the moment? If not, please step forward and state your name and address. I promised you could go first, but you deferred to come later.
I did, thank you. My name's Loretta J. I'm at 116 Rolling Ridge Road. I have not seen this morning's version of section number 5, number 2, written by the attorney, so I cannot speak to that specifically since I have not read it. So I'll speak in 2 parts. First part is with regard to the rest of the policy. I think the policy committee did an excellent job. I want to say thank you. I think it's a sound policy that is based on knowledge, based on guidance that exists, and I encourage, based on that policy, for the board to support and endorse and vote yes on the policy. With regard to section 5, number 2, I don't support reading labels. As a parent of 2 kids who have had extensive food allergies, I can tell you that reading labels is a skill that is learned, and I would not want, interpreting food labels is not something that can be flippantly passed around and ask a teacher to do. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Do I have one last person that wishes to come forward, and then we'll move on to back to the board? I'll take this as the last speaker so that we can get to other agenda items. Please. State
My
your name and
is
address.
Karen Fleming. I live at 3 Rushbrook Lane in Shelton. I'm a fourth grade teacher at Osborne Hill. And I want to say I do many important things at snack time. For example, I'll meet with a student who missed a lesson because they were sick, or they were out at strings, or they came in late. I might resolve a dispute. I might get my smartboard documents up ready to go. I might help look for a missing item. Students have a lot of different things that they need me for at snack time. But the biggest thing I do is supervise to make sure all 23 students are safe. And I think I can't do that and check labels at the same time. I'm a veteran teacher. I've been teaching since 1976, and I just don't see how I would be able to check these food items and safely supervise my class. I don't think it's the right thing to do.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so now we're back to the board. Mr. Fattabine?
I will move to refer policy 5516 back to the committee, the policy committee. I think they presented two very different policies initially. There was the initial policy, which had very different substantive features.
Well, let me get the motion on the table. You made the motion. Is there a second? There's a second. Okay, so make your argument for postponement.
Argument being that this is obviously a difficult issue to balance, make the appropriate balance between the requirements of the students and the requirements of the teachers. The policy committee, after diligent work, came back with an initial proposal, which met some resistance, I guess, and then came back with a second proposal. Both are very different. So I think rather than trying to craft a policy that's acceptable at a table, it's much more prudent to refer it back to the committee so they can take the appropriate action to try and reach some balance and use language that is discussed, vetted, and approved by the town attorney, or the board's attorney.
Okay. Mrs. Maxon Connelly, I think you seconded it. Do you have a comment that you wish to make or not?
We look forward to tackling it again.
Speak for yourself.
My comment on postponing is more to alert the public that I think all 9 of us, and I suspect every teacher out there, shares the same concern of ensuring student safety. This is a sentence that is on a lot of policy language, and there's only a few sentences that are still yet trying to be crafted. In all likelihood, the policy committee will again work with our attorney to try and craft that language. And because it is a legal issue, the policy committee may at some point go into executive session so they could talk to their attorney and then come back out. So just so that you know that committees have the same privilege that the full board does relative to tackling a legal issue. Any other comments from the board on postponing the motion?
Just a point of order and clarity.
Yes.
Are we referring back the amended policy by this board or the original policy
Mr.
that came to the board?
Fattabine, are you referring back this particular section?
I'm referring back the entire policy presented by the policy committee to the board.
My understanding, and again, I wasn't here, thankfully, that policy was amended. So the policy that's going back is the amended policy?
That's what exists at the moment.
It's the
so
policy in
yes.
possession of the board.
All right, but what weight, and I think the policy committee needs some direction, because this board edited and amended that policy. What weight do those amendments take?
I would answer it this way, that the amendments do not yet seem to have the support of the board, and that the board is asking...
Point of order.
I'm answering your question, Mr. Convertito.
But there was voted 6-2. It did have the support of the board. So Mr. Fattabine made the motion, so through the chair to Mr. Fattabine, what weight are we to put to the amendment that was approved by the board?
I would put whatever weight the policy committee decides to put on that after the discussion. I mean, the intent is to, since both versions of the policy that were presented to the board have issues by different individuals in the community, as well as faculty and staff, and in some instances maybe administration, that the intent would be to go back to the committee to try and reach a resolution where all parties can maybe have a better understanding or a better delineation of responsibilities, and I would not limit the policy committee's work to anything, to being open to any changes they want to make and bring it forth and back and present it to the committee. So that's my intent.
Anything further? Is that the last comment, Mr. Patton?
To Mr. Convertito's comment, I would add, or to Mr. Fatabean's amendment, I would add that by referring the amended policy back to committee, that the intent should be to only look at the Section 5, number 2 area that we have been discussing for the last several meetings, and not the rest of the policy. In other words, I would not say that this should open this up for the policy committee to have at it on the rest of the policy that is, for the most part, agreed upon by the board.
That's a comment that you have, but it's up, once we refer the whole policy back to the policy committee, it's the policy committee that chooses.
Understood, but that's my
That's your viewpoint.
comment.
That's just a viewpoint, yeah. If there are no further comments, are we ready to act? We did take public comment on this, but not before we took the motion to postpone this item, and so our protocol is to go to the public for any comments on action items. Anybody else that wishes to comment, or have those comments already been made? On the motion to postpone, not on the policy, but on the motion to postpone. To refer back to policy. No comments on the motion to refer back to policy, back to the board. Are we ready for action? All in favor of the motion to refer the policy back to the policy committee, please raise your hand. Begrudgingly. Okay, it's unanimous. We know that we will get this right, and so eventually we'll see it back. It will be put back on the agenda for the January meeting. And so, excuse me, Ms. Maxon Connelly?
Point of order.
I'll need some.
There was no deadline on a motion to refer to committee.
Can I finish the sentence, Mr. Convertito? I will look to the committee for guidance as to when they're ready to bring it back, so that I can get it on the agenda appropriately.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So, we're on to item 7B. This is the discussion and the action on the calendar. I'll take a slight pause while people leave the room so that we can do our business without background noise. Okay.
Waiting for my items patiently.
Yes, yes.
Like a really important thing to do tonight.
I don't know that I've ever heard a superintendent say that. Okay, so back to the agenda, item 7B, approval of recommended 2015-16 calendar. Recommended motion that the Board of Education approve the recommended 2015-16 calendar as proposed. Do I have a motion, Mrs. Gerber? Do I have a motion, Mrs. Maxon Connelly? Mrs. Gerber, do you wish to make any comments on the motion? No? Mrs. Maxon Connelly? The calendar was distributed at our last meeting, so you have copies of it. Any questions or comments on the calendar as presented? Questions and comments on the calendar as presented? And this is a voting item, so we will go to the public, but...
I'd like to make a motion. I'd like to make a motion that school starts on the 8th instead of September 3rd, which will take us through the chair to Dr. Title. How many more days would we be extended in June then? Because we have to have, what, 183 days?
182.
And the teachers.
So let me say that the motion is to start school on September 8th. If we get a second, Dr. Title will have the time to determine what the ending date would therefore be. Is there a second to that motion to start school on September 8th instead of September 3rd? Mrs. Lou McCormick. What is the impact of that shift of 5 days, you think, to the end of school?
It's not 5 days.
4 days.
It's 2 days.
2 days.
It's, instead of starting on the 3rd, start on the 8th, so the 3rd and 4th would not be school days. So then with no snow days, the end of the year is June 20th, and you'd have only 4 days left before you start eating into April vacation. I should also point out, this is the latest possible Labor Day. So my opinion would be if the board wishes to start after Labor Day, maybe it should pick a year when it's an early Labor Day.
Okay, does that answer your question as to when it ends? Other comments that the board wishes to make on this amendment, this proposal? Mr. Patton?
Through the chair to Ms. Carnell, can you give some reasons why you made this amendment? Is there implications that would help or hinder a school year?
The reason for the amendment is that the kids go back for 2 days, and really, they're still in summer mode, so they have a break. We go into a 3-day weekend and then back, so I'm not sure how much is accomplished in those first 2 days.
Okay.
Fair enough.
That's it? That's the answer? Mr. Fattabine?
Through the chair, Dr. Tyler, if he knows, when the district moves to a regional calendar in the near future, do you know where that regional calendar start day indicates?
In 15-16, if you were to adopt it, it would be Wednesday, the 2nd, but starting in 16-17, it would be Thursday, the 3rd. So the regional calendar is going to begin on the 3rd. That would be the latest the board would be able to start. Should the board wish to start earlier, it could, but it could not start later than that.
This is the last year, based on where the state legislation is at the moment, that we could make that decision. Next year, when we're making this decision, we would have to comply with the start date that you just mentioned, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Does that answer your question, Mr. Fattabine? Okay. Ms. Carnell?
Just to elaborate, how many days before Labor Day is the state looking at starting? I don't have my calendar in front of me, my 2016.
It would be the Thursday before Labor Day.
Okay, same thing.
Same the way we started.
As any other comments on that motion before I go to the public? I'll just make one comment. As you know, a year ago, I was in favor of starting to comply with the regional calendar because to make changes for 1 year when you know the following year you'll have to go back to the other schedule, to me, did not make sense. But that's just where I am at the moment. If there are no comments from the board, I'll go to the public on the motion.
Well,
Yes.
to answer, to say is that they were supposed to do it this year and they
Yes,
postponed it.
correct.
So we don't know that they're going to do it next year. So-
I would not try and forecast what the state legislature might or might not do, correct? So if no other comments to the public, are there any members of the public wish to comment on the motion to change the start date of school from the 8th to the 3rd?
From the 3rd to the 8th.
From the 3rd to the 8th. Thank you.
Planned on commenting on this tonight, but here I am. Joan Robb, I'm a Fairfield resident, 131 Nontapog Road, but I'm also a second-grade teacher at Dwight Elementary, a school that does not have air conditioning, and the sooner we got out in June, the better. My classroom could get up to 93 degrees on a hot June day, and the building holds the heat, and there's not a lot of learning going on then. I'd much rather start earlier and get out as early as possible in June. Also, for young kids coming off a summer break, that 2-day re-entry is a nice way to go in, have that 3-day break, and then come back full steam. It's actually kind of perfect.
Let me finish with public comment, and then
I just want to know what the temperature's like in...
you could ask that question. So, any other members of the public that wish to come forward? Any other members of the public that wish to come forward? Hearing none, back to the board for any further discussion or debate, so you have a question that you want to ask.
Do we happen to know what the weather would be like usually the first week in September? Is it cooler in the classroom than it is in the end of June? Yes. Much cooler? Yes.
Mr. Cullen, I assume that the person in charge of buildings.
Right. Let's go.
Okay. If there's no further discussion on that motion, are we ready to take action?
It's on the amendment.
On the amendment to move from the, to move the first day of school, read the amendment.
The motion is to start school September 8th instead of September 3rd.
Okay. Everybody clear on the motion? All in favor of the motion to move to the 8th, please raise your hand. Ms. Cornell? All opposed? Ms. Lou McCalmick, Mr. Fattabine, Mrs. Gerber, Mr. Dwyer, Mr. Convertito, Mrs. Maxon Kennelly, Mr. Llewellyn stepped away at the moment, and Mr. Patton. So the motion fails 1-7.
Back to the main motion.
Back to the main motion, which is to approve the calendar as presented. Any further discussion or comments? If not, back to the public on the main motion, the calendar as presented. Any comments that people wish to make on the main motion to adopt the calendar as presented?
Nope. Come on back.
Back to the board. Everybody understand the motion to adopt the calendar as presented that you have in front of you? If so, all in favor, please raise your hand. Mrs. Lou McCormick, Mr. Fattabine, Mrs. Gerber, Mr. Dwyer, Mr. Convertito, Mrs. Maxon Kennelly, Mr. Patton, opposed. Ms. Carnell, the motion passes 7-1. Thank you. We have a calendar.
That's a world's record.
It is just about.
Thank you.
On to new business. Item A, discussion of student performance indicators for the district's long-range improvement plan. Jennifer, do you know where Mr. Llewellyn went? No? Okay. Dr. Title?
Yeah, I need
the
to
floor
take,
is yours.
I need to take a few minutes on this.
Okay.
This is an important issue.
Yep, it is.
So you think you need to indulge me a bit, and some people, this is 3A through the rest of the numbers, 3A through E. Right. And also for people seeing this, so people may just be coming to this information for the first time. So in the Board of Education adopted a goal to produce a long-range district improvement plan this year. It's one of the board goals. It's one of our goals as a district. Long-range meaning, generally speaking, a time frame of about 5 years. And in September, I gave out a document, which is 3B, which is the process and timeline for developing that plan. And I said that as we move through the process, I would bring back the work to the board to get some feedback on how we're doing before we moved on to the next stages. And I basically divided the work into two parts. One dealing with the ends, what they should be, and how we're going to measure our accomplishment of them. And the second part, which is the means, how we're going to accomplish them. And so this section deals specifically with the ends. And the ends really are divided into two parts. First is, what are the appropriate student performance indicators that would indicate to us that we were closer to accomplishing the board's mission and goals as adopted? The board gave us a mission and goals. I've enclosed that as 3C, mission, long-term goal, and educational goals. And our charge was to come up with a set of indicators couched in student performance language that would tell us whether or not we were meeting those goals and mission to the extent that we could. And I should point out that I sent this to the board. I don't know if people saw it in the public, but the State Board of Education is involved in a similar exercise because they have to file something with the federal government about how they're going to sort of grade school districts. And the feeling has been that they need to be more comprehensive, that there's more to schools than simply standardized test scores. And certainly the board's mission and long-range goals encompass much more than standardized test scores. And so as the administrative team looked at this, we wanted to come up with ways of measuring our progress in a number of areas, as many as possible. So that's where we are in the process. So this on the document 3B, we're part 1, 1A. These indicators are stated in terms of student achievement, learning, or outcomes. These do not have either baseline information currently listed or a 5-year target. That will come next. But there's no point in looking at a baseline and a target if something we've listed here is objectionable. So we want to get a sense of, are we on the right track here? So we spent quite a bit of time looking at this, and the first step was to determine on what basis would a student performance indicator be a quality one. There's a lot of indicators that you can use, and I listed those in enclosure 3D. You hear the term validity and reliability a lot, so I gave a couple of short layman's term words to describe those. One is that it obviously has to have some relationship back to the mission and goals. If you're picking an indicator that's measuring something that's not in the mission and goals, that wouldn't be valid. It also has to be worth dedicating scarce resources. Anytime we give an assessment, anytime we put something on this, people are going to focus on it. People are going to focus on what you measure. If you put out 20 indicators, people are going to focus on those 20 indicators. And by picking those indicators, you are communicating priorities. That was one of the problems with No Child Left Behind, when it basically narrowed the set of indicators to such a small number and such a small band that it didn't set up the right priorities. People started dedicating all their scarce resources into a very narrow band, and that's where you started to see a lot of school districts start to cut back on things that weren't part of the assessment. So it has to be reflective of our resources and our priorities, and it has to create the appropriate incentives. Another problem with No Child Left Behind, for example, was that they set the standard on which schools were judged to be percent proficient. And so there was no incentive for districts to go beyond proficient, and for kids who were way behind on proficient, there was no real incentive to try hard because they were so far away from it. So you've got to make sure when you set these up that you don't set up unintentionally the wrong incentives. So I phrase it in a positive way. It creates the appropriate incentives because people will respond to what's measured. They also need to have some degree of reliability. This will also vary. And reliability is different from validity. You can have a measure that's completely invalid but be very reliable, and vice versa, which means that it's consistent, there's some inter-rater reliability, and that over time there's some consistency to the measurement. That's going to vary. There isn't a perfectly reliable instrument out there. There's always a standard error of measurement in any exam, any metric that you want to use. And I'm probably not going to use the word metric very much. It's really not a term that we use in education too often. I'm trying to focus on students, and that's why I'm calling them student performance indicators, because these are in terms of what the students should be able to do. Clearly, we want to make sure the staff receive a consistent message about our instructions, so to the extent that we can use measures that are aligned to our curriculum as opposed to something else that's consistent, because we don't want to report out on a measure that isn't aligned to our curriculum, but somebody thinks it's a good test, and if it's a good test, maybe our curriculum should be adjusted. But we don't want the staff to say, well, we're going to be sort of graded on this test, but our curriculum is over here. So we're looking for some alignment where we can. We should be able to publicly defend them, and we should be able to explain them to the public. We also look for some, and I think some board members asked about this when we first started on this, to identify where we could benchmark these to other districts, whether in the state or whether in the nation, and so we've indicated that on the list. Generally speaking, any publicly reported performance data, CMT, CAPT, and so forth, those invariably show up when they exist because it's publicly reported student performance data and it's aligned to our curriculum and it's reliable and it's valid. So generally they're going to be there. At this point, we have a gap in that because only in science do we have state standardized tests right now. Until we get the SBAC in place, at some point we may replace something in here with the SBAC, but right now there isn't a lot of publicly reported student performance data. Good baseline data exists or is easily gathered. If it's too difficult to do, it's going to take a lot of staff time to gather the data, then it may not be worth doing. Generally, these kinds of things are summative in nature, and that the board's goals are about a student when they leave the school system. This is what we want them to have. But at the same time, we don't want to have everything be just high school graduation and by 12th grade. So we want to look for certainly summative, that is to say, end of graduation requirements, but also if there are critical points or certain skills in areas that are highly predictive of success, that we would include those as well. So you'll see that actually we have a set of indicators that begin as early as 4 years old and go all the way through after they leave us. We don't want them overly narrow in scope in the sense that this is for a whole district. It should be for a large group of students. This is not to say that you can't have it on you know, not everything has to be testing every kid, but we don't want to make it so narrow that we end up with 100 of these things. So if somebody says, well, we should really be just looking at, you know, second grade, this really specific skill on this particular unit, that would be overly narrow. Or we're only going to test this very small band of kids. We're trying to look for broader measures. There are some difficult to measure areas, but just because it's difficult to measure doesn't mean that it's not important, and that sometimes people get confused. Sometimes things that are worth measuring are very difficult to measure, and sometimes things that are easy to measure are not worth measuring. And we don't want to, where at all possible, and this has also been a push from the state, we don't want to just layer on additional tests if we can help it. We don't want to over-test our kids. You can test and test and test, and it does at some point become counterproductive and take away from instruction. So you don't fatten the calves by weighing them. What we want to look at then is the whole set of indicators taken together would provide as accurate or comprehensive reflection of the district's mission, given the tools we have available. This can always be amended, but that's the general feeling. You look at the group as a whole and look at it compared to the mission and the goals and see whether or not we've captured as much as possible. We will admit there's probably some areas in there we just couldn't think of a good measure. So that's the background. Let me just explain what the big chart is. The chart is a list of, first it's just a number, it's not a priority. We just start with the end and move ourselves sort of backwards in chronological time that kids are in the system. So there's the name of the assessment or the nature of the assessment. If it's got a specific content area, I list it there. If it's given in certain grade levels or grade levels are appropriate, there's a list there. Generally, there's a date where it's given. Generally, we would be considering looking at year-over-year performance. Then there's two columns about internal and external, and whether or not there's state or national comparisons available. So in the first column is the assessment something that is developed externally, such as the CMT or the CAPT or the SBAC, or is it something we develop internally, like our own rubrics, or in some cases really not applicable? And the second column is whether it's scored internally or externally. Because generally speaking, externally scored instruments will generally be more reliable than ones internally scored, although with proper training, you can get a very high reliability on internally scored measures. And then whether there are national or state comparisons available. If it says yes, it means there's potential for that. If it says an S after it, it means that we think state comparison data would be available. If it says N, it means we think there's national data available to compare. In some cases, there is not. I want to point out something under the data measure, because this is all about incentives and priorities. We had a long discussion about what's the right data point to measure for each of these. And as you know, and I pointed this out last year, and you've seen it in the data that I presented to you, I presented it last year in the budget, I presented it to the RTM, that one area that if we want to meet the board's goal, the board's mission says all students. All students. And while there are a number of subgroups that we're concerned about, the one that stands out and has the greatest number of students in it is the free and reduced lunch population. It's a measure for poverty level. And consistently, on average, students who are on free and reduced lunch have been underperforming their non-free and reduced lunch peers here. And if you look at our comparison to other districts, that's where the gap is. We have an achievement gap. We need to address that achievement gap if we're going to meet the board's goal and mission of all students. Now, if you don't want all students, then we need to change the mission. But as long as it says all students, we need to look at those that aren't achieving. Now, that does not mean, I want to be clear, that every student who's on free and reduced lunch is underachieving. We have many students on free and reduced lunch who are achieving very well. And we have many students who are not on free and reduced lunch, who do not have any shortage of means, who don't do particularly well. So this is an average. And I showed you some of that data last year. So that's one way the administration wants to hold itself accountable to close the achievement gap, is in most of these measures. We want to look at our progress, not just on the overall student achievement, but we want to look at our progress for those students on free or reduced lunch, which has been a historically underperforming population. And you'll also see where there are tests, in addition to that, we have also, because we want to incentivize people not just getting to the proficient level or goal level, we also want to hold ourselves accountable to what percentage of kids do we get to the highest performance level on each of these assessments. And how many kids in free and reduced lunch get to the highest performance level of the assessments. So if you look down at something like academic expectations rubrics, now those are internally developed measures that are part of the high school, and it's a 4-point scale where 3 is considered goal, and 4 would be considered superb. You'll see that in that measure, and in a lot of these other measures, that yes, we want to have increased the number of kids who reach the 3 on the 4-point scale, but we're also looking to improve the percentage of students who achieve the 4 on the 4-point scale. Or it could be said differently in some other places. It could be the percent that are at or above grade level, and then another one might just talk about percent above level. So we're trying to set up the proper incentives where, yes, we need to pay attention to, and if we're going to accomplish the board's mission, we need to look at our interventions and our support and our strategies with students who have underachieved. But at the same time, we want to continue what you've seen in some other data, which as kids move through our system, we actually see with the CMTs a greater percentage of our kids achieving advanced as they went through the system. I showed you that data last year, for those of you who don't remember me ever showing you data. So that's the list, and it's very lengthy. I've also, in the last column, put in the number of data points that each of these would generate on an annual basis, and I tallied them. So that we're actually putting out here a reporting mechanism where on an annual basis, we would report out on 227 data points, starting with some things that are brand new, some existing measures that are in place. There's a measure in there about school climate. There's a measure on there on the arts. There's a measure in there on world languages. There's a measure in there on extracurriculars. There's a measure in there on early reading. There's a measure in there on attendance. I hope you had a chance to peruse this. And I will say that something that's brand new that would obviously have to be a budget item is this concept of a post-high school student survey. There are vendors that do this. It costs, we think, around $9,000 to $10,000 to do. And what we're really trying to assess with that is how well do our kids do in the year after they leave us? So we would look to an outside firm to locate our graduates and ascertain how well they did in the year beyond graduating from us. And that's why that one's listed first, because that's actually a measure of how well our kids are doing after they leave us, not just how do they do when they walk down the aisle. So I'm going to stop there. I think this is actually a very exciting project. I think we're way out ahead of a lot of other places in doing this. I think we're out ahead of the state on this. And I'd like to know your thoughts about where you think we are with this, if it's overwhelming and we need to scale it back, is there not enough, are we hitting the right marks, does it set up the proper incentives? We do have a description of some of the indicators in the back for those of you that don't know, and I wouldn't expect you necessarily to know what all of these things mean. But if you're wondering, like, what's the iReady, there's a description of it on the back on pages, well, they're not numbered, but the last 2 pages. All right,
So-
I will stop there.
Okay, so we've ended on 3E, but if you have questions on 3A, B, C, or D as well, feel free to ask them, but if you would identify which document that you're asking the question on so that Dr. Title will be oriented. I wasn't looking there. Who came first?
I believe Ms.
Okay, Mrs. Maxon Connelly.
Thank you. Several questions. Well, actually, combination questions, comments. First, I enormously appreciate the breadth of these student performance indicators. I think that's absolutely in line with the mission and goals. Doing this entire process was deliberately held up while we worked on those mission and goals. So to see that that is reflected in this work here, I'm sure that committee appreciates, and I know I certainly do as well. I also appreciate what I would consider to be an appropriate and, in that regard, limited representation by standardized tests. They absolutely have a role, but that it is not dominating this, I do appreciate. For number 1, the post-high school student survey, which truly do love that it is on there, what exactly are the details that, or is that so that you don't really know until you talk with the companies in terms of what they hope to glean from the surveying of students?
I haven't personally talked to the companies. I know some people at the high school have. Don't know that I think we can craft it the way we want to. I don't, did Jim or Greg, do you want to comment on that? I think somebody talked to one of the vendors. We only went so far with this, because again, we wanted to make sure that we were not barking up the wrong tree. Anybody want to try it? You got to come up to the mic,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
I think C comes before H, if I recall.
Right. You know, we had our directors of guidance meet with somebody. I mean, we researched this a bit.
Please step forward if you
I don't
wish.
care. If one of you, if you don't want to comment, that's fine.
That's fine.
But I'd love to have
Fair
you
enough.
comment.
Please have a seat.
Okay.
And introduce yourself for the few people that may not know
Right.
who you are.
Right.
Jim Coyne, I'm the headmaster of Fairfield Ward, and we did have a meeting with one company, Greg, Bob Esposito, Karen Campbell, and I. They have a CAN survey. They have a survey that we can add our own questions to. They give us choices of how far out we want to survey, whether it's 1 year after high school graduation, 2 years. You know, we did receive a proposal from them. Greg has contacted another company to hear what they have to say, and we just heard from them yesterday. So it's very much in the preliminary stages of trying to figure out what exactly they can do for us, what the cost benefit would be, and what the return would be. The company that we spoke to has a whole process for assuring that we get a certain number of responses returned. That doesn't involve school staff trying to do it all, but the company doing it, so.
Right.
Very preliminary.
It's really, I think, trying to get an assessment of how kids felt, how prepared they felt, how well they did when they went to college, if they went to college, and that kind of thing, right?
Right.
And also, I put yes in this box because I saw in one of the notes, I think it was maybe from the vendor, that they actually have a database of other high schools, and they've done the survey with across the country. And so it is possible we might be able to compare how our kids' responses compared to other districts around the country, depending on the vendor and whether you pay for that or not.
Right.
So, I mean, that's sort of an option, but you always wonder, you know, if you ask a question and say 70% of your kids answer in the affirmative, well, is that good or not? You'd like to have some benchmark. So some of these companies will provide that, some sort of, I wouldn't say a norm, right? It's just, they have a database of schools that have signed up for this, and they can tell you what they've...
Yeah, correct, because they don't survey all schools. It's
Right.
just the ones who contract with.
Right.
Mrs. Maxon Connelly, you have other questions?
I do. And as a follow-up with that, how does it get incorporated into the strategic plan once we learn these are strong points, these are points that need improvement? How does it get incorporated into a plan already approved? Where do we go from there?
Right. Well, actually, it would be each year, you'd get data from all of these measures. So what I have to say doesn't just apply to this one, it actually applies to all of them.
The rest of it, I could see it. It was with number one that...
Right. And so what you'd have to look at is, because I think that on a periodic basis. I don't know that you would necessarily do an overhaul every single year. My experience with strategic planning is after a couple years of trying the strategies that you have in there, you might want to see how they're going rather than try to do it right away. But you would want to review, based on this information, what are the initiatives in your plan and what implications does that have for other changes in the district. So, for example, if you got a result back that seemed to indicate the kids were struggling, let's just say, with a particular subject, then that would be information that would be helpful for the curriculum development, resources, intervention, and so forth that could be used right away. And so I think that's very helpful and would not necessarily have to wait for a whole plan redesign to enact. I think that once we got the results back from this, my guess is that there'll be a lot of eager participants because, we don't get great information. We get anecdotal information
Right.
on graduates. And, I think it's something that, I think it's worth investing in at that price. And I'd have to say after a year and we saw what the return rate was and whether we thought it was valuable information, then we could decide whether we want to keep it or not. But I could see it directly impacting.
Okay.
Yes.
Couple more questions. In terms of the eventual landing of the capstone, is this something that will work integrated well with the capstone project, or is that going to be a whole new burden on the teachers?
Well, the capstone project is lurking. But since it's not yet fully developed, we didn't include it here.
Okay.
I think what could happen is that we have the academic expectations rubrics, which are something the staff has developed and is sort of a build-up to that. It could be that at some point the capstone project might come in and either be an additional item here or might displace something that's already in here. Just like SBAC, once it goes in, then it may displace something in here or it could be added on depending on what we want to do.
Okay, and I had one, in terms of our feedback on this, because again, I liked all of them, but there is one that I would like to suggest, and I don't know what you do with the suggestion or not, but you mentioned formative assessments, and that's something that I think is definitely a room for improvement at our high school level, which is the very low weight given to formative with the very exceptional weight given to summative. And at college levels for freshmen, and if we're trying to enforce certain habits, I know one thing this district has done superbly and other districts would envy is the standardizing horizontally in terms of it's consistent how much teachers are counting various measures, whether it's homework or whether the projects, et cetera. But I would say if we, as you say, people will prioritize what gets measured, and the thought that formative assessments are evaluated at such a low percentage is saying something about the value of certain homework, et cetera. And that would be my suggestion as a topic for discussion, is perhaps looking again at that high school rubric.
Well, I think you've got, this document is intended to be summative in nature, right? Because this is an end of course, end of year, end of 8th grade, end of high school kind of a thing. Now, there will be formative assessments along the way, and that's a big part of what you're probably going to see in our improvement plan, is going to be improving the use and the quality of our formative assessments across the grade levels. It's a project we've already started on, and that's a way that teachers can measure whether kids are on track to getting here. But to add all the formative assessments in here, I think would be overwhelming. And I think it's going to be all we can do to just get the summative assessments out. But clearly, I don't think there's anybody that thinks that, just because the one that's reported sort of publicly is the end of the year, I think it's, the role of formative assessment is important there. It's just not something, they're formative for a reason, because they're not intended to assess how far you are at the end. So it has a huge role in it. So we'll definitely take, I think we'll just take all the comments under advisement. I don't want to sort of argue any points, but I will say that in the means part of this, in part 2, I think you're going to see some language around improving our use of formative assessment. I can almost guarantee that.
Mr. Convertito.
A couple of comments. If you're using the new mission and goals statement that was approved in August. For your data, are you deriving your data points from that? Is that, am I correct?
Generally, we worked from that. We tried to find something that would approximate the items that are in there, particularly the mission statement and the long-term goal.
So if I look at just item number 1, post-high school student survey, and you have one data point there, are we looking, I mean, it would seem to me that that survey could give me a lot of different data
Well,
points.
you're right. One's probably, I wasn't quite sure what to put there, to be honest with you, because as Mr. Coyne said, I mean, there could be 20 questions
I'm just
on the
looking
survey.
for a correlation, because then,
Right.
then I look at,
Right.
extracurricular participation, and there's
Right.
28.
Right.
I'm just curious to what you're looking at, just so I get a better.
Right. No, I think
comprehension.
you're right.
I'm not looking to,
To have more data points. No, I agree. I think that post-high school survey, I think 1 is too low. I think that if we have, 20 questions on it, I think you get 20 data points. And in fact, you could even look at it and break it down by subgroups. I mean, you could get a lot more data points out of the survey. It's just such a nascent concept. I didn't want to oversell it.
I was just using that as an
Yeah.
illustration, but the
Right.
basic concept is each data point relates to something on our mission and goals statement.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
We should be able to, actually, I had a column in here when we first started. I asked people to put the relationship back to the mission and goals in here, but I took it out because the page got too long. And just because it has more data points doesn't mean it's more important. Okay, so.
No, I
you know what I
understand.
mean?
Right.
Okay,
No,
all right, I didn't want to make
understand.
that impression. So it doesn't mean that extracurricular participation, because it has 28, is more important than something that only has, say, 12.
No, I understand that. I'm glad to see that you've broken out, I'm glad and unhappy. I hate to stigmatize people on reducing free lunches, and I wonder if there's a better way to break that out demographically, so there's not sort of labeling.
Well,
I know we have an achievement gap, okay? But I know national statistics will tell you that, a lot of it's economic and so forth. I'm just wondering if there's a different way to identify.
I wish there were a better measure there. That's the most commonly used proxy for poverty. The problem with that measure is that it's binary.
Right.
You are or you aren't. There's no gradation in it. And you'd almost like to do it in a little more fine grain. But if you look at a lot of educational research, that's the only reliable proxy that you have. The other subgroups that we have that underperform, some of them are contained within this group, but some of them are very, very small, and we didn't want to just target a specific population to the point where you could almost pick an individual student out. So this was a wrestling match we had. I mean, we grappled with this. I've looked at some where people have been very explicit about minority student achievement, and we didn't go there. Some people have put it in under special ed student achievement. We didn't want to go there. We want that to be part of the general population. So this was a real wrestling match. I wish there were a better indicator of poverty than that one. We just couldn't find it.
Along the same lines, and I think back in the fall when you handed out your goals, you had identified English language learners as another group. And I'm curious as to why none of that has been.
Yeah, I think that falls into it's such a small group.
Okay.
But remember, we're still talking about 100% of students meeting benchmark.
Okay.
So no one's off the hook here, right? And there's also an overlap between the free and reduced lunch and the English language learners. Not perfect, but it does capture some other subgroups in its own way, without identifying, a particular group. And it's also, free reduced lunch is somewhat of an unknown. I mean, it's not something you'll walk around with a badge that says, I'm free and reduced lunch, where some of the other groups are pretty identifiable. So I think that we're trying to get the mix of incentives right here. We want people to pay attention to our underachieving kids. And so that's why we want to look at the overall achievement, which will capture all the subgroups. But we targeted that one. something that we've looked at the district data team level. It's a concern. It's a growing population. It was just a choice we made to keep the data somewhat manageable.
Okay, and then just my last comment, and I wasn't quite sure if I heard you correctly. Did you say external scoring is more accurate than internal scoring?
Generally speaking, yes.
Okay.
Is that it, Mr. Confortito?
That's it.
Why? Do you agree or disagree?
No comment, I think,
I'm
is the
not so
comment.
sure that I agree.
It's more reliable.
Okay.
Well, 2 + 2 = 4. It's still internally scored by
Mr.
a
Patton,
teacher.
followed by
No, you
Mrs.
could, I'm sorry, let me just say that you can, with the right training and the right measures, do a really good job of internally scoring things. I'm not saying you can't do it. And a lot of the internal scored things here are not really scoring. It's a bad way to put it. You know, when you're looking at percentage of kids achieving credits by graduation, that's not really scoring. It's probably the wrong word.
Well, I guess when I look at, like, item 5, and you have it, internally scored.
Yeah, that's not really scored.
What I'm afraid when something like that comes out is that we're going to be looking to have somebody else score it and pay for it, and I'm loath to go out to more outside. I mean, that's what I'm looking at when you
Oh,
say
I
something.
understand. Well,
Okay.
career and technical education, that was a good one because we had a whole debate about that. See, this one, career and technical education is not a standardized test. Okay, if you look on the data measure, what that, and we talked to the teachers in this department, what their measure of progress is, first of all, how many kids enroll in those classes and stay in those classes. But secondly, and I thought this was very sort of brave of them, but I think this was a great indicator, is what's the number of non-traditional students that enroll in these classes? And that's an internal thing. So there's no testing here for this, okay? Because there's just not enough kids. But there what we're talking about is, for example, family and consumer sciences, a non-traditional student in there would be a male, right? Some of the tech ed classes are heavily dominated by males, and there aren't as many females in some of our engineering and technology classes. So that's what we mean by non-traditional students, and we think that's a worthy a measure to keep track of and try to improve, and the department was up for that. So it's not a standardized test. Thanks. Yep.
Mr. Patton, followed by Mrs. Lou McCormick.
I want to thank Mr. Convertito for asking about the school climate survey, because I had the same comment about how do we get one data point out of a multi-question survay.
On the graduate follow-up survey.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah, the school climate survey is number 12.
I mean, I'm sorry, not the school climate survey.
Yeah.
That's what I meant. In terms of testing, so as is, there's no plans for any additional testing, things like the iReady test. Those are tests that we're already doing, correct?
Yeah,
Or is
well,
there anything that's
there is some extension. We're trying to actually have some more consistency in some of our internal standardized tests. So if you, there is one that is additional that we're not currently doing is number 7, 7A and 7B. This is something we work with the World Language Department. That's the royal we. Royal we means Meg voice. Work with the World Language Department to say, all right, we're talking about, this. Is there a good measure we can use to say how our kids are doing in world language? Those assessments are not currently being given. Those would be additional assessments that would be inserted into the curriculum at the beginning at level 20, which is basically the second year of the language, at the conclusion of the second year of the language. And we'll have to budget for those because they are externally developed assessments of how our kids are doing, and there's a different one. So those are all, those ones are new. The iReady is not, I think we were looking to standardize that in grades 4 to 8. It's possible that, I don't know if we're giving the iReady in 6 to 8 in language arts this year. No, that would be new. That would be an extension of what we're doing. iReady was given through grade 5 this year, correct?
Only math? It's math?
No, language arts.
iReady not in language arts yet. We're waiting on that state.
Okay, not at all. All right. So this is still in development, because ideally, we actually would like to give the same assessment K to 8, but the state is coming out with a list of K to 3, so we may have to switch to a different one for K to 3. But nonetheless, I think that would be an extension of our reading comprehension and making it consistent through grade 8. And iReady and math would be additional in the lower grades, correct?
Presently in the lower grades.
Right. Starting in kindergarten? Okay, so that's existing, and we do give it in 6 to 8. All right, so that's not extra. A benchmark assessment system is in place, and I don't know about the age for the CELF. Is that currently being given? Do you know? That'll be new. So there's a mix. I don't think there's a ton of extra testing in here, but there's some. I think that's the highlights. Anybody out there think of anything else on there that's new? That may be it.
Mr. Patton, you have another question?
Well, just to follow up on that, how many of these that we're not doing now would we have done anyways without this plan approved or not approved?
I think we would be doing, I think we've been committed to basically 3-time-a-year testing from an external source, like we used to have Blue Ribbon, you know, and we're replacing that because it doesn't align anymore to the Common Core and to the SBAC. So I think we probably would end up with these one way or the other, regardless of this. What I think is we're trying to get as much consistency through the grade level so we can watch kids progress on the same assessment as long as that assessment is valid for that age group. So you can have tests of reading comprehension that they may not even be written for certain grade levels. They stop at a certain grade level or they don't go, you know, too far. But where we can, we're trying to get consistency. And also you can see we're trying to get consistency between the levels so that we can address the issue of the bump between, say, 5th and 6th. If we've got a consistent assessment, a measure that goes between those grades, that will help us. And currently, in many cases, we switch assessments when they get to 6th grade. So I think we'd end up with, I don't think we would end up with the world language assessment. I don't know if that would have come up as part of the curriculum. I think that one probably is new. But I think this, we sort of went to the departments and said, look, you know, you're part of this plan, you're part of the system. How are we going to judge success in your department? On what basis would we judge that? And sometimes it's participation, sometimes it's credits earned, and sometimes there was a valid assessment that they felt would help them. Sort of a mix and match.
Okay,
Anything
great.
else? Mrs. Lou McCormick?
Yeah, so I took a look at this, and it's a very comprehensive list of items that you've taken a look at. I guess one of my questions would be, when you look at, for example, the AP scores, I know you mentioned you seem to be focused on all students, and then you kind of came back to the achievement gap, and then refocusing on the free lunch. So we're kind of like all over the place on that. But it does look like you have some consistency throughout, looking at level and then again looking at advanced level, right? So you're trying to do that across most of them. I noticed though in the AP though, we didn't do that. I'm just wondering why we didn't look at 3, 4, 5, because that's kind of a telling story versus just 3 and above. Is there, I was just there a reason?
I don't think, yeah. I think we've been using, you know, in our public reporting, we've been using, and the College Board uses 3 and above. We could include, you know, we could include more there. I think what we wanted to do down below, as well as we added additional AP by trying to get more kids to take and successfully complete an AP course by graduation, both at the free and reduced. You know, so if we have, you know, say 70% of our kids complete one AP course, we'd like to bump that up to, say, to 80 or 90. So we're looking at that as well. But we could add another line in there about, say, 4 and above or something like that. That's possible.
Yeah, but just because I think it tells a story. And also in terms of the percent of students that are actually taking the course, like that's also an interesting story to see if more kids are taking APs, and then are they progressing further, or are we just getting more kids taking APs, but really they're not performing, they're just taking the class. And that's kind of a different story. So we'd like to see more of them taking it and then more of them performing on it. And then that tells a good story that what we're doing is actually helping everybody. As opposed to if we have more kids taking it and then kids are actually doing less well on that test. So that's one comment on that I had. The other comment I had is just on the post-high school student survey, which I think is a great idea. Suggestions is it would be really interesting to see, and I don't know if they can get this, upon graduation, maybe we collect this data anyways. Do we know who goes to what college, how many kids, what percentage of schools kids go to, I don't know what you call them, top tier, second tier, whatever, all the different schools kind of label them differently. But it'd be interesting to see what our success is with the various universities and also vocational schools that kids go to. And is there a trend of kids moving more towards one segment or the other? Are we having better success getting more into the top tier and the second tier, or is it actually falling away? Are we having more in second tier, less in top tier? Or are we having a lot just go to third tier schools? I think that kind of trend analysis is also telling of community perception of how people engage and want to recruit Fairfield students, because I find that that is also a very important factor, along with just the students' numbers. In fact, universities will actually recruit more heavily at different schools based on their perception. So I just wanted to throw that comment out to consider that as a good data point to collect if you increase that one data point to 20. The other thing I would like to suggest is that I hear that you're concerned about the bottom level. I'm concerned about that too. I'm concerned about all the levels though, and I'm wondering if there's a way that instead of just looking at percentage at advanced or percentage at goal, we look at percentage growth, if there's some measure of progress, so that we can see in the advanced group, in the, I don't know how, you seem to have levels 1, 2, 3, 4. So if you have 4 groups, what is the percentage growth that each of those group students are seeing on average? So are we seeing 8% growth for, level 2 and 4% growth at level 4? Or are we seeing 15% growth at, you know what I'm saying? So that shows the differentiation of the categories and the actual growth that the students are achieving rather than just an absolute kind of, percentage. 85% should be here. Because we don't really know the students themselves. Every year it's going to be different. So you may have a really super bright group one year and, maybe slightly less next year. But really what we're concerned about is each individual child and making sure that they each grow, whether they are brilliant, are they becoming more brilliant, or if they are struggling learners, are they becoming less struggling? So
I understand the concept completely because growth of the same group of students over time is sometimes a better measure than looking at the same year, but looking at a different group of students who are going through that experience. The hard part is coming up with an accessible and really statistically acceptable way of measuring it. States have been working really hard at that. There were a number of attempts at that under No Child Left Behind. People talked about trying to develop a growth model in it. It's extremely technically difficult. And so we've started to look at it a little bit internally, and really you can make your head spin. So we completely had that conversation, and it's because we realized that this is called cross-sectional data. It's a different group of kids taking the 10th grade assessment this year than last year, and you can have differences in clumps of kids. Now, that's another reason why you generally want to test large numbers, because they tend to wash out when you have large numbers. It's like insurance claims, right? It's a law of large numbers. So if you're testing, 500 kids, chances are from one year to the next there aren't going to be huge differences, but there could be. We'll continue to pursue that. It's just, on my experience in looking at this, it's just really hard to do well and have it mean anything to somebody.
And can I ask with the iReady test, is that possible to, because I understood they took it in October, and so if we took that in October and you take it again in the spring, that could be a measure of how much progress a group of students have experienced over the year.
Yes, but what you don't know is compared to what. So that's the rub. But
Well,
yes,
I
you can measure progress over time, but of course the expectation goes up over time.
Absolutely. But
Right.
again, so this is going to be nationally scaled. I imagine iReady is actually a public. So we can actually see nationally how people have grown as well versus in our district.
We could also do the same thing spring to spring for the same group of kids, right? In other words, we could take spring of third grade iReady scores and spring of fourth grade iReady scores and look at a year's growth, right? Give them a full year. That's another way to do it.
I may interject. I think what you're saying is...
Mr.
I'll
Llewellyn?
defer to him. I don't know if he has a
Mr.
comment, so
Llewellyn.
that's fine.
I think what Eileen may be saying is normalize it versus the national so that you see if you're growing or if the test is changing.
Yeah.
I think that's
No,
what
I
you're
understand.
Okay.
Yeah, I understand. I understand the point. I think that what I'm saying is you could do the same thing over a full year's worth of instruction.
As long as you normalize it against national norms,
right.
yes.
Right.
Wait a second.
So-
Wait,
Mrs.
and I have one more
McCormick,
comment.
do you have one more
before
comment?
you intercept. So that was my comment, and I was thinking that maybe iReady could be that kind of a form because it is a national test. I suppose you could also do that for the SBAC as well, which I think harder.
We
so
don't know
because it's
that
not
yet.
as granular. Well, we don't know it.
Yeah.
But I'm hoping that some nationalized test would allow that opportunity. And then, two other things is I noticed that inside the strategic school profile reports in Connecticut, one of the things that I found very interesting is the statistic of how the percentage of high school math kids were taking in middle school. That percentage, looking at how we achieve, meaning how we've prepared our elementary school students to articulate into the middle school process and how we compare to peers across at least Connecticut. We can take a look at that. That to me is a very interesting statistic and one that I would hope we would see growth in because that shows how well our elementary schools are in fact preparing us, the kids, for higher math in the middle schools, which of course then carries on directly into the high schools. So that articulation process, I would hope that maybe we can find some sort of a measure and we could set goals or benchmarks over time that we would see growth for an increase of students taking high school math in middle school. And then lastly, I know I'll throw this out. There's going to be a million reasons why we shouldn't be doing this. However, I still think that this to me is a perception and it's almost a marketing thing that has some weight in the world. And that is how we rank on some very large, well-known, established national ranking for high schools or middle schools or whatever it is. I know U.S. News and World Report is a very, very well-known and respected one that people just tend to look at and acknowledge. The number, less important, but just the general range and who your peers are.
Eileen, excuse me one second, I want to interject. Make a motion to extend the meeting.
Wait a second. Are you about 1 minute away from finishing?
Yeah.
1 minute? Oh, sorry. Finish your 1 minute, and then I'll take the motion.
Okay. So I would ask if we would also consider putting some sort of a target for ourselves to say, hey, right now we're ranked, top 500, top 700. Our objective in the next 5 years is to be in the top 400. It's very vague, it's very general, but it gives us something to reach for, and we have all the underlying targets. If we set all our underlying targets correctly, we should move forward in that weighting. And I think that type of a thing would bode well for, I think, pride in our community, as well as kind of advertisement across the country, as well as perception by university of our district.
Thank you. When I look at the agenda, I think probably 11:30 would do it. Can I have a motion?
Motion.
Mr. Llewellyn moves to extend the meeting to 11:30. Mrs. Maxon Kennelly, any discussion or debate? If none, we're ready for action. All in favor, say, raise your hand. It's unanimous. 11:30 it is. Who is next that wishes to make a comment? Mr. Llewellyn.
Perfect. I may have missed this, it may be in here. What is the timeline for this in terms of getting it in place and having the first, I may have missed it, and having it...
Item 3B.
Data there. No, when are we going to get the first set of data once you've kind of reached that?
Oh, you mean after it's approved?
Correct. After the whole thing is, after the cake is baked.
Right. So the way I see this happening is that we would, once the board approves this, This whole thing is going to come to you for approval as a package. Not going to go with the indicators first and move on. We'll bring this back. Once the board approves it, then what the first step would be to collect as much baseline data as possible where we can this spring. We need to have baseline data, and we need to have it as rapidly as possible. And so, because what we would do is, as part of this package, actually, when we bring it to you, where we have baseline data, we would also be listing our 5-year target. So we would have the baseline data where we know it, and a 5-year target for your consideration. And it could be that for some areas, we don't have the baseline data, but we would do our best to collect it before you approve it, so you can get a general idea of where are we on this. So for example, we already know where we are on the state calculated graduation rate. The data is already out. So that's an easy one.
Right.
AP scores, we just got them. I mean, we've got that baseline data. So in other words, we've got some baseline data. We'll bring it to you when you see the plan as sort of a draft for approval. And then the next step would be to collect the subsequent year's data and report on an annual basis on how we're doing towards our targets. So we can't look at all of this, but I think there's a fair amount of this we'll have baseline data. The post-high school student survey, we won't have any.
Right.
Because the earliest that can be given will probably be for the class that's graduating now, and how long it would take to get it and get it back. So some of it may roll in, and we may just have to update the plan. So that's the game plan right now.
Okay, so I guess I didn't quite follow, sorry. So to get a populated template would be, it looks like July, August?
No, no, I'm trying to get this to you so you can approve this before the summer.
Okay, and so our first results would be September, or would be a year from September?
Now, you'll have your baseline.
Right.
Your June baseline and whatever we have, and then your first results to compare to those will be the following June. So you need 1 year's worth of activity,
Agreed.
and then you'll have.
And I'm assuming it takes a couple months to compile, that's why I said September.
Right, so I think that on an annual basis, you're probably going to take you to, my guess would be sometime in the next fall.
Okay.
Would be your update from the previous year, because all the data, for example, if we end up putting in, an SBAC gets in here, for example, when we can get those results back, nobody knows.
Right.
So to some extent, we might have to, in the first year, pick a date of, the October meeting or something, and just say, here's what we have. And if it looks like we just don't have enough data, we'll have to maybe do it in a November meeting. But it'd be somewhere in the fall, people would get the results.
Okay.
Because it's going to be if we go with all these data points, it's going to be quite the project. So that's how I would anticipate. Baseline data, we would know, say in June, and then your first year's data would be collected the following June and reported out sometime in the fall.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Some of the other things I thought of adding, one was, I had the same comment about the AP scores 4 and above. I think would be a good category to add, because it tells you about the progress. I think a lot of universities only accept 5s or 4s. So if you're looking at it for an acceptance perspective, that is a different metric.
Yep.
I think one of the things we could add on here, as much as people don't like them, would be the SATs and the ACTs, just so we keep a trend on here. I think that's an obvious one that should go on, because it's one of the few national norm tests that are going to be taken regardless. It's just a matter of populating the data.
So let me, I won't completely object to that, which you may find surprising. The SAT is under redesign right now.
Absolutely.
And actually, the state is really going to be pushing, and there's a chance this could happen. We don't know. The rumors are that the state may actually get permission, or they're going to try to get permission to have the SAT replace the 11th grade SBAC, because the new SAT is supposed to be aligned to the Common Core. So if the SAT is aligned to the Common Core, it is therefore aligned to our curriculum. And so it's possible, I think that the time to consider that would be when the new SAT gets delivered, because they're really trying to make that much more curricularly aligned, because it's starting to lose ground to the ACT, which is a little more aligned to curriculum as a general rule.
Right.
So I would say that probably in this first iteration, I think that might go in the category of SBAC, which is, when it's redeveloped. And when's the new one being given? is it fall of spring of 16? Spring of 16. So I would, and again, it'd be very hard to compare versions of it, so my thinking would be that we look at that as a spring of 16 data point.
Right.
Because I think at that point, then you're going to have it, then we won't violate the rule of something unaligned to the curriculum. Because right now, it's not really aligned.
Well,
But I think the new one will be.
It's very closely aligned to college-bound seniors'
Right.
futures, so I think
Right.
it probably belongs on here right out of the bat, but that's my opinion.
Okay. But I didn't completely disagree with you.
There you go.
Okay.
We can start that now, I guess, right? So I think the other thing, in terms of the clubs, I think we should have a specific category for some of the academic clubs. You know, how many clubs and what participation do we have in the math clubs, in the science bowl, in the Odyssey of the Minds? I know that I'm getting granular, but I'm giving you the kind of perspective here. You know, robotics, Lego First League. Some of the STEM type clubs that folks participate in. I think another one that we could put on here is some of the other academic clubs. Like I know last year the folks, I believe it was, I know it was at the middle school level, but I think it was Roger Ludlow and maybe one other middle school participated, like the history competition at the state level. And that was a great program that was put on by the library media folks. But if we can capture some of that on here, that's going to, you know, signal to folks that, you know, those clubs are acceptable and are things that we want to draw kids toward as well. I think the other thing that is missing here, and although this says it's student performance indicators, you know, when I go back to the first page, it is about our long-term district improvement plan. I think we should track teacher retention, because I think that's really important for the district. And I think we should, in terms of the climate survey, we should have teacher satisfaction on there as well. Because I think those are two data points that are a barometer of the district as well.
I would suggest that those could be in the means area. They're not the end.
They may not be the end, but they should be tracked on a matrix like this.
I'm just trying to keep this to the ends, which is students, but attracting and retaining highly qualified teachers is a means to that end.
That should be
Correct?
tracked.
Right.
Is there a tracking place?
Sure, we did a whole report for you.
Okay, but it should be tracked publicly like the rest as opposed to not. And I think getting some of the climate survey stuff tracked over time would be a good thing to have as well.
Okay. I hear you.
Okay.
Anything else, Mr. Llewellyn?
I think that's good, thank you.
No? Any other, Mr. Fattabine, followed by Mr. Fattabine?
I guess maybe just help me understand this student performance indicators a little bit. Is it my understanding that these are now going to be, or these are proposed to be the only student indicators, or are there other student indicators as well?
These would be the student performance indicators that we put in the long-range district improvement plan.
All right, so
There's a bunch of other indicators out there that wouldn't necessarily get reported.
right, but they wouldn't be used to determine whether or not we're making.
That's correct.
The data points. Is it my understanding that the data points are individual data points and they're not necessarily weighted any differently, or
Right. There's no weighting assigned to any of these. This is just just to give you a sense of how much data will come out of this. So if you're measuring across the same assessment across 9 grade levels, and you're looking at it at 2 performance levels, and you're looking at it at free, reduced, and total achievement, you're going to get a lot of data points from that one assessment, because it's given across a lot of grades, as opposed to one that's just given in a single grade, and you're only measuring a single data point. Doesn't mean that one's more important than the other, but we wanted to try to cover the whole grade span of the system. Sometimes you have a single assessment that spans a lot of grades, so you end up with a lot of data points. It's not a measure of weight. I think the weight will be what people want to put on it.
right?
And, you know, people will judge, some people will look at this and say, you know, of this list of, 17 indicators, I think there's 5 that are really more important than others, and other people will think another 5 are more important. We're not judging which of these are more important than others. We're trying to develop something that will give a fair picture about the board's entire mission and goals.
All right, so it's not overall student performance, it's just student performance in these particular categories that are improving or not improving. and then you weigh on your own whether or not, for example, dropout rate may or may
Right.
not be an indicator of student performance.
Well, it is an indicator of student performance in the sense that if students drop out, they didn't do well.
Maybe yes, maybe no. There's a lot of reasons why people drop out, not because they flunked out or they didn't do well, but they had other
Generally
things to
speaking,
do.
people want to see the dropout rate go down.
Right.
So we're not going to have a target that says the dropout rate is now 5%, our goal is to make it 10%.
No, I understand
Okay.
that, but that's not necessarily an indicator per se directly of student performance. There may be a situation in the economy and the environment or whatever that requires
Sure.
a higher dropout rate that is not necessarily indicative of student performance. That's my only comment.
Okay.
Now, in part of the, on document 3D, about the middle of the page, you have publicly defensible and understood and easily explained, may benchmark to other districts, publicly reported student performance data. What do you mean by publicly reported student data?
Something like AP scores?
Can you look on this student performance indicators and identify the ones that you would consider to be publicly reported student performance data?
Yeah, the state calculated graduation rate is publicly reported. AP scores are publicly reported. CMT and CAPT is publicly reported in science. Connecticut Physical Fitness Test is publicly reported, number 10. Not sure. School climate surveys vary from district to district, so those would be the only ones currently that are publicly reported. The iReady is not a publicly, that's a local decision. Now, it's nationally normed, but it's not publicly reported like, you're going to read about our iReady scores in the newspaper, or there's going to be an award for your iReady scores like we got for our AP. There's a big lull in the publicly reported data right now.
Right.
Because we're between assessments. And so if we were doing this with CMT and CAPT fully in place, you'd have a lot more publicly reportable data than you have right now.
Are there any of the public reported data you would consider to be national standard data? And where would they be on this?
I don't understand what you mean by national
That are
standard data.
national, that student performance data
Yeah.
that compares us to a national standard.
Right. The only one would probably be the SAT, and as I explained, I think we should wait for the new version.
Right, that's not on this list.
It's not on the list for that reason.
So on this list, there's no national standard indicator
AP.
of student performance. AP, all right.
But how about the iReady and the SBAC? Aren't they
Wait a second,
national?
Mr. Fattabine, do you have any further questions, or do you want to defer to Mrs. Lou McCormick?
I can yield
Okay.
temporarily.
Mrs. Lou McCormick, a quick question,
do wanna
because
get to the,
time is moving ahead. Yes.
I thought iReady and SBAC were national tests that would be normal.
SBAC would be on here if we had it. I just didn't put it on here because it doesn't exist yet. So SBAC will be reported out, obviously at the state level, so that will be publicly reported data. And I think they'll also, in the, say, 20 states that give it, you'll get the results from those 20 states, but you won't get it for all 50 states because half the states are doing PARC and half the states are doing SBAC. Well, not half, but some aren't giving either. But SBAC would fall under, when SBAC is given, it will fall under the category of both of those.
And iReady also, I thought.
iReady is not publicly reported data, but it is nationally benchmarked.
So, Mr. Fattabine, and maybe the last one or two comments, and then we can move on to the other agenda items, and certainly if anybody has questions on this, they can follow up with Dr. Tittle directly. Mr. Fattabine.
All right. On your document 3A, near the bottom of the page, the last paragraph,
The front page or the back page?
the front page. For many indicators, we include a measure of overall student performance and a measure of student performance for those students receiving free and reduced lunches.
Correct.
I understand the purpose of that, and I think it's a good purpose. And on your enclosure 3B, you have a fairly simplified graph, I would call it. I guess it is a graph, identifying certain points on the graph. And as I understand it, the distance between point C and point B indicates the improvement from point B?
Yes,
quality?
yes, that's exactly right. The gap between B and C is basically, if we did nothing differently, if we took no new initiatives in place, made no improvement efforts, the district would basically flatline from A to B.
Which is not good. We don't want that.
And we don't want that. As a matter of fact, we probably would go down if we did that. Now, I'm not the kind of person to just stagnate. As you've seen, we give you 32 initiatives every year. So C represents the board's mission and goals. When the board's mission and goals were deliberately structured to be aspirational in nature. The board's mission is a lofty mission. All students achieving at high levels is, in so many words, ensuring that, that's a very lofty aspirational statement. So C is in a much better place than we are right now.
No, I
Right. So the gap between B and C is what we are going to try to work on.
Right.
Last question?
I'm glad you referenced the graph. I spent a lot of time on that.
Last question, Mr. Fetterbean?
Last question, you're going to limit me?
Yes. In the interest of time and getting to the non-reoccurring, which we need to move forward on so that we can take action and meet the
I'll sum it up
deadline.
pretty quickly, hopefully.
Thank you.
You're using multiple data points in a way. You indicated on that first paragraph I read that the overall student performance and the measure of student performance for those students receiving free and reduced lunches. I would like to more directly measure the achievement of all students necessarily. In other words, not or each. Part of our mission and long-term goals is each student to achieve academic progress.
Yes.
I agree. You want to see progress in certain classes of students, but you also want to see overall progress for all classes of students. And I think so I would like to see that and assure that we're making progress
For all
each
students.
and
Yeah,
not
and,
just
and
some
that's the, and that's why you have, the overall performance is listed first, and then the free reduced is a subgroup.
Right.
So you can track the percentage of students overall. So we are going to measure how all students are doing in this plan, but we're also going to measure specifically the one subgroup of students that are,
Right. No, I understand. My concern is, though,
so
that
we have both in there.
that's my concern, that both
Yes.
are addressed.
Yes, they are both addressed.
Thank you. I would only have one last comment. I presume that more than 17 indicators, we won't use the word metrics, that 17 indicators were on the table for debate. And at some point, do you have a kind of an upper limit that says, here's the maximum that I think you could responsibly go after?
I think we were concerned that we were going a little overboard here. There were a lot thrown on the table from a lot of different perspectives, and people did a great job of brainstorming what's possible. And we did thin the herd from what we started with. Because not only can you have more indicators, but you could break it down even more finely. And I think at some point, when you end up with 300 or 400 data points, you're just going to overwhelm people. And so we're going to have to really come up with a way to display this so that it's not going to be 227 dots on a piece of paper for people to look at. So I think it's going to be a challenge to display it. I guess my feeling would be that I think it's what the board's comfortable with. I think we're willing to do the work if you want to capture all these. If you think this is too much and we should thin the herd further, I'd be interested in that feedback, but then you need to tell me which one you think needs to be thinned, and that's hard. And I say we try that for a year, and let's see how it is. And I think if we find it to be redundant or overly burdensome, perhaps we can thin it back a bit.
Thank you. Please continue to give comments to Dr. Title on these documents, and we'll look forward to the next reiteration of this at another meeting. On to item 8B, the proposed capital non-reoccurring. I remind the board that the RTM has asked if we could move the capital projects through at one point so that they can focus on the operating budget during their normal schedule. So we have tried to move this forward in December, vote in January, so it can get on their calendars for review. Dr. Title, do you have a few comments on
Yeah, I'm
the
going to make a
document?
couple comments, and then I think we'll just respond to questions, Tom and I, on this. I think the roof replacement probably speaks for itself. Those of you that have been here for at least 3 years might recall that we had a number of our elementary roofs that were in reasonably good condition, and through a brilliant stroke of genius, we actually were able to extend the lives of those roofs by 5 to 10 years. But when they looked at the Dwight roof, they said, this thing is so far gone, we can't even we can't fix it for another 5 to 10 years. So it's on there for replacement. Tom can speak to that more. Jennings, this continues our project of replacing our energy efficient and old and aging boilers in an attempt to get them out before they collapse in a heap. We did North Stratfield this year, right? It was 1964. So these are the next two oldest ones. The Fairfield Ludlow High, the artificial turf field, you saw an email from Jerry Lombardo. The thing gets tremendous use. It's tearing up. We've got some pictures in there. It's really a community resource. It's not just our football field. It's something that really needs to happen for student safety, and the testing shows that this thing is really at the end of its useful life. And the big one is the security infrastructure project. The town is expecting this. We had to, in conversation with the police department, this was developed by the police department. If you remember, after Sandy Hook, they did a full analysis of our schools. We made a lot of improvements that we could with the existing funds, and we said we would come back with a fully developed infrastructure proposal. Mr. Morabito, Mr. Cullen, myself, worked with the police department, looked at what other schools were doing, and we generally talk about security in executive session, but since now we're asking for a lot of money, the police department were safe with us giving you this general overview of it, the general categories. But if you have specific questions, I'm probably going to defer on those and send those to the police and see how they feel we could answer them, because we don't want to get into too many specifics. The chief and the deputy chief couldn't be here. I think I sent you their note of support for this. So we're going to try to keep the details of that to a minimum, because really if you go into too many details, you lose the effect. So we would like to get these through. We really want this to be a voting item on the January agenda, because then we get it to the Board of Selectmen on the second January meeting, which gets us to the Board of Finance in February, and done in February before the whole budget process starts at the town. So I'm going to stop there because the hour is short.
Yes. So-
And we can also respond to your questions in between meetings as well. Tom put this booklet together. I got to give him a shout out for doing this. The town has loved this, the pictures. I just want you to know he put a tremendous amount of effort into gathering all of this in this fashion that has been appreciated over the years. Okay, now I'll stop.
Any questions that are needed at the table at the moment? Yes, Mrs. Gerber.
Yeah. I know I had asked Tom in an email about the turf field. I know that we've gotten some emails talking about health concerns with the rubber, and I had sent that to you a couple of months ago when some people had sent it. There was something on NBC News, and so I just wanted to follow up. It looks like this is another rubber particle turf
Right,
field, so I just wanted to get some more insight, because I know that people have asked, and
Sure.
just to get ideas about health concerns and whatnot.
Yeah, I think the first thing we want to say is that the report that came out on NBC has not been substantiated, the cancer-related issues. The rubber system that we're using is called a crumb rubber. It's a recycled rubber material that's mixed in with the turf. It's the most widely used product. It's still labeled as safe in the market. I did do some research to find out what other options there were. There is a cork and sand fill material. Generally, what I read about that and researched was that it's used in very, very warm temperature areas, such as Texas, Florida, Arizona, California, where the black rubber pieces would get really, really hot under the heat of the sun. We also researched a product that's more organic. Could not find a lot of information on it. It's based out of Canada. And then the third one I researched is a microbial polymer that's mixed with sand. What I didn't like about that is I'm having trouble finding out what the chemicals are that they're mixing with it at the moment. But
I'd like to have
generally-
Dave comment on this too. Dave Schultz, athletic director, because I know you're very involved with the state. This has been an issue that's come up from time to time.
Yeah,
I just want to give you a chance to weigh in on the condition of the field. Anything else, you've waited all night, and it's 11:25, and this is your issue. So I didn't mean to cut Tom off, but I had, Dave waited all this
Fine,
time.
I was just going to add that Fairfield University just replaced theirs. We were watching that and in touch with them, and they did use this crumb rubber material also.
Thank you. Mr. Schultz?
Yes, our field does get a lot of use. It's our only game field. It's our really only field at Ludlow that we can participate athletically on for varsity athletes. So we do go from 2:30 till 9 o'clock at night each night, so our lights are under use for that. And it has worn out. It wore well. We got a lot of use out of it. It drains incredibly well. The replacement will not affect the drainage. They would not have to touch the drainage. They would just kind of rescope it. But the field definitely has served us well, but it's worn out. And as far as the rubber, at our state meetings, this stuff does come up on the athletic directors, and it's the same thing. Nothing's ever been substantiated other than, if you were to put the rubber into a bag and kind of stick your head in the bag with it, it probably wouldn't be good for you. But the way it is done this way, it really doesn't seem to be a problem.
Other questions from the board? And Mrs. Gerber, if you want to follow up with them further on that, please do. Mr. Fattabine and Mr. Convertito.
All right, I guess I just noticed in this booklet that the security infrastructure upgrades are spread out over 2 years. To the extent we approve this non-recurring capital proposal, we would then necessarily limit our capital expenses for the following year as well.
Yeah, what we did is in the waterfall schedule, it's near impossible to spend the $3,322,000 in one summer, 1 year.
Right.
So we broke it into 2 separate years and identified our priorities.
Yeah, and I just want to point that out, that it may limit our capital spending for next year.
Yeah, thank you. Mr. Convertito? Did you have a question?
Well, that was one of my questions. The other one was, and I was actually quite surprised by our Director of Park and Recreation's extensive use of our fields.
Why does that surprise you?
I just didn't, I knew they used them, but I didn't know they used them that much.
Yes.
When we go for funding for this, I think it's important to have him in on the conversation because as Dr. Title mentioned earlier, it's more of a town asset than it is, or equally a town asset as it is an educational one. So I just want to make sure that we reach out to him to be there when we go for this funding.
Yeah, they're concerned about being involved. We have 2 artificial turf fields on the school side, and the Park and Rec Department put in the one at Tomlinson.
And he's very interested in this. He just couldn't be here tonight, and I think he will help us. And listen, we're essentially asking the town to fund this, right? This is not coming out of the Board of Ed operating budget. This is capital money that we're asking the town to pony up here. So I think that people do realize not just this field, but so many other fields that are on the school side are used. And, we do a lot of the maintenance and put the effort in there. Okay.
This will be on for an action item at the first regular meeting in January. If you have more detailed questions on this document, feel free to call Dr. Title. Quick question, Ms. Carnell.
I think earlier when we were talking about this, you had mentioned ward as well. Will that be something that'll have to be addressed shortly in the near future?
Yes, probably the following year. It doesn't get as heavy a use, but it's still, longevity is 8 to 10 years from the manufacturers, and wards was put in 2005.
And what is the cool fill, infill top layer for $15,000?
It's just an added material they use for the sample. The good news with this product, it's now gone from a 30-ounce to a 50-ounce material. It's much denser, heavier, longer lasting. So they add this cool fill mixture in with it. We don't have to dig down the base, as Dr. Title said. The base is existing. They may have to fill in some spots here and there, but they really take off the top. They actually use a roller and they roll it up. It gets reused, doesn't go to a dump, which was good that we researched. And then they put the new top coat down.
And I also want to point out, this does also involve the track.
Yes. the
Repairs to
running
the track as well, right?
Yes.
Because, Dave, the track's in tough shape too, right?
Yes, it has. It is all kind of worn out. There are some, as you see those pictures, there are some cracks in it that really need addressing.
And there's no guarantee that the Ward 1 will be in next year's capital.
Ms. Carnell, any
just
other
in the
questions?
plans.
Okay. If none, we'll move on to the minutes with the board's indulgence. Do you suppose we could take a single motion for each of the, all 3 minutes?
One change.
You have one change. I'll take a motion for the first minutes, that the Board of Education approve the minutes of the organizational meeting of November 25th, 2014. Do I have a motion? Mrs. Gerber, Mrs. Maxon Connelly, any comments or questions on that? If not, all in favor, raise your hand. Mr. Conforti, are you? You're, okay. 8 and 1. The second one? Yeah. So the second one is that the Board of Education approve the minutes of the regular meeting of November 25th. Do I have a motion? Mrs. Gerber? Mr. Patton? Is that the one you have a question on?
On
quick
page,
question.
sorry, on, well, not page, a correction. On page 3 of the regular meeting notes, my comment here, and just on the topic of allergies, it says, Mrs. Maxon Connelly stressed that this policy also addresses non-ingested allergies. That is not what I said. What I said, it also addresses non-ingested allergic reactions.
Do you have any objection to that being correct? Did anybody have an objection to that wording correction? So I'm going to accept that as a friendly amendment to the minutes, unless there's one person to object. If there's no one person, then the minutes will be approved with that slight change of wording. Any other comments on those minutes? If none, all in favor of the minutes as adjusted with that wording, raise your hand. You weren't there? So, and you weren't there, so it's 7, 0, and 2. And the last is the approval of the minutes, that the Board of Education approve the minutes of the special meeting of December 1st, 2014. Do I have a motion? Mrs. Gerber, Ms. Carnell, any questions on the special meeting of 12-1? Hearing none, all in favor, please raise your hand if you were there on 12-1, if you wish to vote for these minutes. That's 7, you're voting, or you're opposed? You weren't there. You weren't there. Okay, thank you. So again, 8, 0, and 1. I have 1 minute left there for one open comment. The January board meeting, I know that we dealt with the bylaws at November, but that was the report of the ad hoc committee. I am aware of one bylaw that had been held over regarding the methodology of approving amendments that we said we would take action on, and I'm aware of one member of this board who said they may be submitting something, and so anybody that has something, you should get it in so that we could address it at the January board meeting. If you don't have anything, you don't have anything, but we have at least one item, which is the process of amending bylaws, which was held over from the last meeting. So that's just an announcement. One quick. I'm going by that clock over there.
I just wanted to say, I know there had been a comment made that saying that we don't have the full CABE Code of Ethics, and I did look into that, and we do, in fact, have the full CABE Code of Ethics in our bylaws, in our policy. I did notice, I went back, I was trying to figure out where there might have been an abridged version. There is an abridged version that's on the Board of Ed website. If you go to Fairfield Public Schools and to Board of Ed, it's this link, it's like 3 down, so perhaps it might be better to just take that off or replace it with the full CABE Code of Conducts, but the fact of the matter is they are in their entirety in our bylaws, in our policy.
No other comments? If there are no other comments, I need a motion to adjourn. It's 11:30. That's right, too. No motion to adjourn. We're adjourned automatically at 11:30.